Oh, sorry. All right, sorry. I'm late. Not on time. Hello. Who's all here? Chad, Hermit of Enon, and Mark. Hello. Yeah. I'm assuming this is a joke, as I was not here yet. So I've been very ill for a number of days. I had a fever, so I don't know. Apparently that's probably COVID or the flu, and started last Thursday or Friday, because I didn't go to pre-sanctified or Lenten dinner last Friday, and I'm just basically recovering now. So what's up, Foxman, Kaido, McMo, Peter from jolly old England? We're gonna talk about some English folks today, some Brits. So that would be Mark too. And also, yeah. So the biggest thing I've been thinking about is pride. But then I'm also very much thinking about this Father John Behr article, which came out. I put all this stuff in the notes. I actually made notes in there so people can follow this stuff and go more in depth if they want to. Afternoon, Mark. And so PDK in his homeroom this morning, or he just put out this brief little video on this Father John Behr article from Public Orthodoxy, I believe it was. And I actually sent it to my priest, and he hadn't seen it until now. But I mean, I guess, I don't know when it came out. And, priests are very busy this time of year. And so essentially it's on heresy, orthodoxy, Ukraine, Russia, Bishop Kirill, the Russian patriarch, and what actually constitutes heresy. And I sent it to my priest, and I sent it to this good deacon friend of mine, and who, he was under Father Behr at seminary, and this is what he said, because he was teaching a church. I did a live stream on stemming from one of the things that he said to a catechumen class, stemming from 1 Thessalonians 1, I believe, on the church. And his comment after reading the article was, the church is where the will of God is done. And I love quotes like that. And when he came over here the other day, and he saw this icon that I got from Stephen, my boy Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. And he and he said it was Saint Cyprian, and he said, of Carthage, and he said, it's interesting that you have this, because he knows I'm a universalist, and so he said it's interesting that you have this icon of Saint Cyprian, because Saint Cyprian, one of the things that he's famous for is this quote that, like, there is no salvation outside the church, essentially. That kind of idea maybe started largely from Saint Cyprian, and he's venerated, I think, in all of the major branches of Christendom. And he's except he was more Greek. He was in Carthage, Northern Africa. He was more Greek, or no, Latin speaking, I think, because it was so close to Italy. I believe that's right. Stephen, you can correct me, or somebody else can correct me. But so this gets at a question of heresy, something I'm always thinking about, heresy. And that's very connected to Peugeot's idea of pride and identity. And it's very connected to my ideas around confessionalism and even we believe and I believe. So all of this is kind of the same thing. And I bet I can make it all connected to martyrdom's bad theology as well. Because that is a comment stemming from the comments under the video of Brandon Graham Dempsey when he interviewed me for his podcast, Conversations with TLC. And then he's done another one with Sam. I think he's going to do one with Chad. He's just making the rounds. He did one with Christian Seabacks. And all right, so let's get into it. I'll just say some things and see where we go. So Peugeot's one of his main points from that Ralston talk when he was talking about pride, this line just popped out to me, just like boom, like a I'll also answer this question, but Mark, what is a universalist? But I'll tell you what I call a universalist and what I am, how I'm framing that. Well, actually, I'll just forget. I'll tell you. So, like, there's 3 standard Christian positions on hell and salvation, all that. It's called the traditional view in the West, eternal conscious torment, post-Augustine. That's kind of considered the normative view. Far Side comics. It's where hell and death is not actual death. It's a living death where you're consciously tormented, punitively punished forever and ever. So the punishment is not restorative or redemptive. It's just punitive, merely punitive, legal and punitive, and you're there forever consciously being tortured to whatever various degree. There's a spectrum within each one of these views. And then there's the annihilationist perspective, or the conditional immortality is another way that it's stated. Sam Tiedemann is this, my boy Sam. It is like, if you're a sola scriptura biblicist, it's probably the position you should have, in my opinion. Which, so even like people who just like believe the authority of the Bible. I don't know if T-Grog would count as that or not. It's just like, I don't know if who T-Grog thinks is more authoritative, the Bible or magisteriums, or, some sort of traditional, does the church have the authority, or does the text have the authority? Or is that a conflation? And which has preeminence? That question. So annihilationist is like where the punishment is death. And so like there's maybe some torture for a while, but then you're killed. So like it's not a living death. You just cease to exist. You're annihilated. You no longer exist. Death is non-existence. So it's like the punishment is capital. And so the term, because punishment is one of these deverbal nouns. This is something I've been talking about with T-Grog, where the time of the punishment, any deverbal noun, which is a noun that is a verb turned into a noun, so like punishment, translation, any shun kind of noun like that is a deverbal noun. And then, but the term, the time, the terminacy of it is indeterminate. That was my priest responding to the article. And so the punishment in that term, in that sense, is capital. Like there's maybe part of the punishment is some torture, but then you're killed, like you're decapitated, you cease to exist. It's the most like common understanding of death, although we have this understanding of death because of this understanding of eternal conscious torment, where death is not death. It's a living death, and then universalism, or universal reconciliation, apokatastasis, whatever, those are all kind of different ways to say it, is that you believe eventually every human being, and probably the entirety of the cosmos, is reconciled to God and saved. And so in that sense, hell is in some sense purifying. The punishment is purification. And so that it's not merely punitive. It's a discipline meant to be correcting and reconciling. It's a punishment meant to lead you to repentance. And then you think hell is essentially, you don't make hell eternal. It's not, hell is not something that is everlasting. So anyhow, that's the hell thing. Let's go back. What was I talking about before that? Oh, the Peugeot Ralston. Okay, we're at Peugeot Ralston, 9 minutes in. So he had this bullet point to me. It was a bullet to my brain, and it just stuck in there, lodged right in there. He said pride. He was talking about pride. Well, first he was talking about identity. And the way that he framed it made perfect sense to me. I mean, I used to talk about this all the time, that like years ago, 3-4 years ago, in the little corner, we were having these conversations constantly on the Boxer about what does it mean to have a body? What is an identity? And I basically was saying that to exist is to be bodied. There isn't anything that exists that doesn't have a body. And we have a baked in, like fish not knowing they're wet, materialism and physicalism and this is one of PVK, even though whatever, this isn't the literally debate, but what most people think is real is the physical. Like, this is what's real. This table, my face, what I can touch, what you can sense with your five senses. That's what's real. Or at least that's the layered on philosophical understanding of what people think is real. That's what they think is real. Whether or not they like really believe that that's what's real, because they don't act that way, because we act like other things are real, like love or whatever. And you can't touch love. You can't touch the idea of love, the abstraction of love. Anyhow, so anything that exists is bodied. So like angels exist, in my opinion. Spiritual things exist, but they exist bodied. So even like, I would basically say that. That's my current understanding and always has been my understanding, that anything that exists is a body. So like love is a body. It's just, what kind of body is it? Well, it's a spiritual body. It's a subtle body. I would ultimately probably say it's an angel. And because there's all these different layers of angels classically within Christian theology, there's, thrones, powers, dominions, principalities, cherubim, seraphim, there's all these different layers of angels, different kinds of angels. And so like a power or a dominion or a throne is an angel, but it's not the kind of angel that we think of, archangels, like guardian angels. The kind of angel that we think of is like just a messenger angel, but that's just a certain kind of angel. That's not these other kinds of angels. Often how we think of like Platonic laws or physical laws, laws of physics, I would say that those things, really, the conception of them, all models are false, some are useful. Those things to me would have to be angels, and they would have to have a body. How do you define that body? Well, this is what Peugeot is talking about in that. That's some kind of an identity. Because he says essentially in there, an identity is something that it's a boundary. It's saying this and not this. Anything that has an identity, that's what it is. It's a boundary. And it's defining something that's in and out. Now, not in an isolated way, because there's always relationships between inside and outside. That's why everything is relational. But to identify something is to say it's not everything else. To see is to see in a way that is rational and conscious with self-awareness is to not see everything else. So that's why you have your focal vision and you have a periphery. So like and Peterson talks a lot about this, even with like robotic eyesight and vision, is that, sorry, still dealing with a lot of congestion and stuff, that a lot of your, what's the term? What's the adjective for your visual? A lot of your, I'm trying to think of eyes, oral, optical nerve. A lot of your optics, no, that's not the right word. A lot of your vision stuff is inhibitory. So in order to see, a lot of what's going on in your brain is inhibiting stuff so that you can focus. It's excluding things so that you can focus and see. Because if you just see everything, just hit my mic. It's seeing everything is seeing nothing, and there's no identity. That's why beyond the unity beyond any dualism is monadic, and there's no distinction. So to identify anything is to include and exclude. So Peugeot speaks about that, and he's talking about all this in terms of icons. And so, but then he says this line. If you want more on that, go listen to Peugeot, or you could talk about that forever. It's a complicated idea. It's one of those things that's the hardest thing to get people to see is the thing that everyone has decided not to see. And sometimes the hardest things to articulate are the most fundamental, basic things that everyone knows, but they don't know that they know because they've never thought about it. But that identity thing is like, it's so basic that once you see it, you're just like, well, of course, and you'll see it everywhere. But most people have not thought about it very much. And but then he makes this line, which I think is so true. And he says, pride is an excess of identity. That is one of those lines that it's a condensation of hundreds and hundreds. It's like it's an aphorism. It's this like pithy little phrase that captures its poetry. that captures reams and reams and reams of potential explanation. It is super condensed. And I think he's true. I think it's true. So I'll try to illustrate what I think he means by pride is an excess of identity. So you can have part of your identity, can be your body, your physical body. So that's one aspect, one of the many relationships, because a person is a multi-unity. The person is the center and the nexus of every relationship that they have. It's the unity that holds all those relationships together. The thing behind the thing behind the thing. That's the person. The essence. I mean, I don't even know. I need to have a conversation with maybe Sam and Paul Antleitner or other people about hypostases and essences and things. But like, that's in my understanding, my uneducated Lucian understanding, that the person is the unity that holds everything together. So you can have all these 4 P's of knowing, and that's why I said the personal is the unity of all those. Every P that you could have, every kind of knowing that you could have, the personal is the unity of those things. And so what was I just saying? Identity. So your body is one aspect, right, of your identity. I am this, not that. Like this cup is not part of my body, which allows me to grab it and use it, but like it's related to my body because it has a relationship with my body. So like depending on how you want to frame it, it's not part of my physical body, but it's part of the body of my house, which is part of my body. The things that you surround yourself with, your neighborhood, your home, your city. Those are parts of your body, your person, your relation. They're just not part of your physical body, but they are part of you. Sorry, at some point I might just have to pause this sucker and blow my nose. But pride is an excess of identity. So if you want to take any one aspect of your identity, this is my problem with confessionalism, is you will take an aspect of your identity, one aspect of it, not the unity behind it, which is mystical, because it's the unity of all those things. It's the mystical monadic thing that includes all of them. If you take one aspect of those, like let's say of your knowing, of your personal knowing, of which there's all these subcategories, Russian nested dolls within that pyramid, you have propositional, perspectival, procedural, participatory. If you take then the propositional aspect, which is one aspect, which is part of your identity, I'm not anti-propositional. It's a part of your identity. It's good. And how it works and how it integrates, that's a whole different conversation. I think it's potential because it's not manifest yet in your body. There was some line recently. Dang, where did that come from? Oh, that was in a movie that I watched. I was like, dang, that's a great line. Come to me. Muse. Come on. No, it was a line. It's a lyric from a song. What was it? It was something like, my body is... Oh, it's from the Staves concert. I'm going to find it and come back to it. Because I was like, dang, it's funny how when you listen to music in different formats, I was just like, that line had never hit me. And then I was at the concert live and I was just like, dang, they write some good lyrics. It was something like, what was it? I am not my body. My body is... They said it so well. Shoot, this point matters. Sorry that I'm belaboring this. It's essentially like my body is the choices. It's the consequences of the choices that I've made or something like that. And that's true. That's what your body is. It's the memory of your will or something like that. Because how you manifest yourself in your life, which is related to the propositions, which are this future potential, but then how your will and your reason and your intellect plays with those things and embodies those things, that then your body is the memory of your will choosing a number of different things. Anyhow, you take one aspect, there's a little bit of an aside, but it's related. You take one aspect of your personal knowledge, which is part of the multi-unity that you are, the propositional, which is potential. It's not even an embodiment yet. It's a potential, right? But you take your self-identity with this, which you to varying degrees are and are not embodying ideas of how you self-identify. So like, take any aspect of how you identify. I identify as a father, and I self-identify as a father. But if I am only a father in as much as I act in accordance with what a true father is, like whatever the good, archetypal, perfect idea of a father is, in as much as I act in accordance with that, then I am a father. And I can have self-identify to that I, when I do that well, I'm acting in accordance with that. And when I don't do that well, I'm acting in accordance with it. But you can have an identity so much that, like, if my idea of me being a father and my idea of what that father is becomes so totalizing and abstract, and I have such a sense of pride in my identity of a father, then it becomes a sin, because a subjective thing has become the most preeminent thing, and then you fall. Pride comes before a fall, because you've elevated that to a place that is not the highest. And it's an excess of identity in any particular aspect of who you are. So like, but then what we've done is, like, not so much a father is obviously an embodiment thing, but then, like, you could take an idea of, like, I'm a Christian, or I'm a Democrat, or I'm a whatever. I'm a LGBT affirming person. I'm pro-life. I'm whatever. And if that becomes your totalizing identity, and it has no allowance for and you fall into, like, the Ouroboros, where, like, it's incapable of correcting and repenting, where, like, the circle, think of Tomberg, and the circle breaks, which allows for the spiral, which is further up and further in, which allows for repentance, which allows for new understandings of what you have previously understood. If you're not in that, you're incapable of intellectual repentance, and then you're stuck in this place of pride, which is death and fall and unrepentance. And so that's what Peugeot means, I think, by pride is an excess of identity. All of this, I think, is really connected to this Behr article, by the way, because if you, for an instance, have pride in, I need to read the whole thing, but, like, in, if you are Patriarch Kirill, and this isn't, I'm not judging him, I'm just speaking to myself. I'm not making a judgment, but I'm just saying and I don't know the details, but my understanding is that because of the Ukraine war and problems, then that also played out in the Orthodox Church, the Ukrainian Church, and the Russian Church. And Kirill wants to move away from the ecumenical patriarch who's in Istanbul or Constantinople or whatever, and sever communion somehow, because you can't have this war against another country that's Orthodox. How are you going to be tied to the Russian government and connected and approval, and then having this war? So you have to make some sort of pronouncement against it to justify this action, right? But that is some degree of, that's ultimately what schisming is, because this is what this article is about, is when is it right that so, like, every body, again, right, every delineation of a body, whether it's spiritual or physical, has a head, and the head in an emanating way will impose upon the body certain choices with its will to make for the good of the whole body. So, like, when you fast, when you meditate, when you exercise, you're imposing your will from your head onto your body for the good of the whole, so that when you don't eat cake all day, that's what you're doing. But then also you can rationalize and justify with your head eating cake all day. And then eventually what happens is, this is the whole book, The Body Keeps the Score, which I haven't read, but I like to quote about. When your head imposes an unjust, unright authority on the rest of your body, the body will react in a way which is just, like, not good. It gets sick. It maybe gets cancer. You maybe get diabetes. or if you hyper exercise, if you do too much exercise because you are addicted to exercise and some other form of pride, the body will keep the score too and just be like, you're dying. You're exercising away muscular tissue and you're unwell. And and so this is the emanation and emergence, the body, the manifestation, the memory of what the mind imposes on the body. Those things need to be in harmony for a body to be in harmony. And it's the exact same thing in a body like the church. So like the church has a head, which is in a local church, it would be the pastors, the priests, and they are under the authority of the bishop, who is the head of them. And then that bishop is under the metropolitan, is under the patriarch, right? And then that's the head. And they need to have a healthy relationship with the rest of the body, or else the body falls apart and the body splits and dies. That's heresy. So this is where I would agree very much that heresy cannot be merely propositional, because propositions in and of themselves don't divide the body. They don't. They're just they're just potential. They're just ideas. Embodying division separates the body. So what is actually causing, you could argue that the ideas in and of themselves are causing division, but like you can have different ideas and not divide. Arguably you could say that estuary, TLC, this situation is a body. You could argue that TLC is a body. Sam, I love to use Sam as an illustration in here. Paul, Neil's Catholic, Chad goes to a Lutheran church. He's not even, does he identify as being Catholic? I don't know, but he goes to a Lutheran church. All these different things. Evangelicals, you have Christian Baxter, who's just evangelical. Lots of people who are Michael Sartori, who's a Baptist. We have this body, many different ideas, but we have a unity. Could you say Paul is the head? Well, he's kind of the head, but he's the kind of head who's very non-traditional in an American sense, because he's not a head who is overly imposing his will in a systematic way to make the body do certain things. He's kind of just like, do what you want to do. You be you. But this gets into the question of like, what is heresy? What is schisming? What actually causes divisions among you? I'll quote the book of James because I love quoting the Bible. James chapter 4. I should just read it. I don't have a Bible handy. I'm not that much of a but I'll look it up. I have an app on my phone. There it is. And it's but it's James chapter 4. It's a chapter that I've often told my son that we should just memorize, or I've told him he should memorize it. I used to want to just like have him copy it down just to, because it's great on quarreling and fighting. But James chapter 4, what is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? Is it not the source of your pleasures that wage war in your members? So pleasures, desires. What's great about this app is you can just click on a word and it gives you like the Greek. So like the Greek of pleasure. So you can just look up individual words and do word studies and really dork out if you want to. But so pleasure, it gives you other places where the same word is used, is hedon, right? Hedonism, right? Pleasures. So what causes, is it not that the source, which is intuethen? I don't know what that word is. And I can't make any sort of cognate relations. But is it not the source of your pleasures that wage war in your members? So, the New Testament's always members of your body. So like hand is not the eye, is not the foot, the members, the parts, the multiplicity of the unity of the body, right? So is it not the source of your pleasures that wage war in your members? So in the different parts of your unity, fighting against each other, right? You lust, you want something. The word, what's lust? Epithumeo. I've heard that word before. To set one's heart upon, to desire, to lust after, to covet. You desire and do not have, so you commit murder. King David, right? and you are envious, and you cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures. You don't want it for the right reasons. You adulterous, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility, enmity towards God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you think that the Scripture speaks to no purpose? He jealously desires the Spirit which he has made to dwell in us. Receive with meekness the implanted word. That's back from James chapter 1. But he gives greater grace. Therefore, it says, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Because listen, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Why? Because pride is an excess of identity and leads to the Ouroboros and death. Pride comes before the fall. So obviously God gives grace to the humble, because if you're proud, you're not going to get grace because you're headed toward death. So when you are humble, God gives you grace because that's what humility is. Great. Humility is not pride. And so, of course, he gives grace to that because that's the natural way that it works. That's just because God is God. Submit, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Two minds, deliberative will. Saint Maximus. Do I do this or do I do this? When you are as you ought to be, you will just know. That reminds me of that Jung quote. I love it. Jung's response once was, do you believe in God? And he said, no, I don't believe. I just know. That's right, because you do. I don't have to believe in God. I know God. Do you believe in your wife? I know her. It's the same thing, but it really is the same thing. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you, because they're the same thing. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded, unstable in all you do. He's calling back to James 1, and John chapter 7. Singleness of eye, singleness of vision. Purify your eye. Take the speck out so that you can have one eye. Purity. Single. When your eye is one. And this is obviously like, you have two eyes, but you don't want double vision. You want them to see as one. You want the two as one. This kind of fractal reality is everywhere. Cleanse your hand, you double-minded. Be miserable and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you. Do not speak against one another, brethren. He who speaks against his brother or judges his brother speaks against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge of it, trying to discern good and evil. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But who are you who judge your neighbor? The Bible's awesome. I mean, just keep reading the book of James. It's excellent. Man, I've been talking a long time. I want to say a few other things before I open this guy up. So this is the we believe versus I believe. I don't know. That could be just like a whole podcast. Because again, the I and the we, that's part of the multiplicity of the unity of you. There's I, but there's also the we of my family. But is the we of my family separate from the I of me? No. I mean, they're part of me. Unless you get a divorce and then it's a schism and you've divided the body. And so, or if you've ostracized and what's the word? If you what do you call it? Liberate your children, or you just say, I never want to speak to you again. There's some word, it's not coming to me. That's it. You've broken the body. You're a schismatic. You're a heretic. You've insisted upon division. You've insisted upon your own way, which love does not insist upon its own way. 1 Corinthians 13. And so, so I would argue that the I and the we are part of a greater unitive one, a greater unitive whole, just like your eyes. I mean, they need to be together. And so you could say either. This is what I would say. You could say either I believe or we believe. And if you say them in the right way, they're both fine. However, I would say you cannot ever pit the two against each other, which is what traditional faith is and should be. A traditional faith should never say coercively from the top, from the head, from the body, from, if like tradition is the democracy of the dead, Chesterton, well, a traditionalist will impose with a kind of coercive authority on whatever has been said or maybe written before and say, well, you must also say this in exactly the same formulaic way. Well, that is a coercive, systematic, manipulative thing that insists that the I is part of a we in an unhealthy way. But you can't do that. The we can never converse the I in the same way that the I can never coerce the we. They need to be in harmony. And so it's not an either or. And I would argue that you cannot, this is why the Jesus, like, who do you say that I am? Thing matters. What you think matters. You are never, no man is an island. There is no autonomous, isolated individual. Doesn't exist. But what you think about things matters. So you actually have to learn what you think about things, which may not be what you think that you think about things. It's like when you're a child and you're just taught to say things. Well, do I really believe that? You have to figure that out. You have to come into your own. You have to cleave from your parents and be united to your wife and become the fullness of your own person, which is something that has left its original family, not completely, but it's cleaved from this to become its own body, its own thing, which is still in relationship to this body, but it's a separate entity. It's not identical replicationism, but it is related replicationism. And so that's the we believe thing. And then martyrdom is bad theology. This was a comment that happened under Brandon Graham Dempsey's thing. And to me, and Brandon, if you watch this, I would say I enjoyed our conversation. This isn't a judgment against you, but I would say if you think martyrdom is bad theology, you don't understand Christianity. You can't, you cannot understand Christianity if you say that martyrdom is bad theology. It's the blood of the martyrs is the seed, is the what do they call it? The seed of the church, or like it's the ground that the seed of the church blooms in. It's all over the New Testament. We're called to be martyrs and slaves to Christ. Saint Stephen was a martyr. There were so many of them were martyred. Jesus was killed. I don't know how you could say you have any relationship to Christianity and martyrdom. Now, there are aspects of where they say, like, whatever, it can be a death cult, but like, this is also the cult of life, the cult of just equating life to like keeping your heart beating. What is life? Go into that. Start thinking about what constitutes life. Is it a beating heart? Well, you're going to make a lot of bad choices. There can be, people say there's a death cult. There can be a life cult. Again, where your idea, pride and identity, your idea of life, if it becomes so absolutizing and so encapsulating and closed off from anything else, from anything unknown, from any right brain interpretation of what is life, then it will become pride and it will kill. We saw this all over the last few years. You can, for life, for good, for human flourishing, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And if we don't, like, it's going to be bad. Or, you can keep someone on life support for whatever, and they can be like a vegetable, essentially. Is that life? Is that human flourishing? What is life? Is it merely a beating heart? Somebody dies and falls into the ice and they're underwater for 20 minutes. Their body temperature sinks, their heart stops beating, and they can be brought back to life. Were they dead? Were they alive? What is life? Their beating heart in your physical body is part of that. It's a major part of it, but it's not just that. Life is so much more. And I think the whole idea of Christianity, if you could simplify it down to an idea, is this idea of trampling down death by death. Jesus Christ reconciled even death to life. Death was the enemy, but death has been robbed of its sting. It no longer has hold over you. It's actually become the gateway to life, which is the whole idea of resurrection, is that if you fully embrace your death in every aspect of it, which is, like the epitome of martyrdom, where you no longer fear death, and you've become either the white martyr or the red martyr, which the white martyr is the one who learns to die every day in everything, to not insist on their own way, but to give up of themselves, to self-empty, like Philippians 2, and to give of themselves out of love for the other, that their at-one-ment, their relational at-one-ment, this is what henosis by kenosis means, involves a self-emptying and a sacrifice of love for the other. You find your identity in the other and not just in your own life, which you cling to with your fists closed. But that is life. That's what Jesus is about. Love has nothing greater than this, than you lay down your life for your brother or your enemy, or Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. This is laying down your life even for your enemies is quintessential to Christianity. And you do that in faith because it can't become mammon, because you can't just be like, well, I'm going to do this because like I know what's on the other side. No, you don't. Anybody who says they know what's on the other side is a liar. I would say that. I have faith that there's a resurrection. Do I know what that is or what that means? No, I don't know what that means. But I have trust in God that it will be okay. Whatever it is will be okay. I don't know exactly what it is, because if you knew exactly what it was, it would be mammon. It would be another control game. That's not what's going on there. So martyrdom is not bad theology. Martyrdom is the best theology. All right. I'm going to open this up. I've been talking a long time. I have some kids that are home and sick, and then I will go back and try to look at comments. I'll try to ping. I will post. I'll try to pin the thing to I can pin it in my own channel. I can't in Grail Country because I don't know. I should be able to, I guess, but I don't know how. Here's my channel. Here's me. This is me talking. Pin message. Got it. All right. So that's done on my channel. I'm going to go back and look at comments. And maybe I should. That's really good stuff. Blowing my nose. Wow. Bryce, here's a friend who I've connected with, at least through comments recently. I blew my nose too fast. I didn't have it cleared up well enough.
Hey, good to meet you.
Finally. What's up, buddy? Nice to meet you.
Yeah. I've watched your stuff from a Paul Vanderclave filtered vantage point for quite some time, and found some free time this morning. I thought I'd jump on and say, hey.
Nice. That's awesome. So I'm all about, this is what Neil says, that apparently my superpower is just integrating and bringing in new voices. Like that's what I do. So I'm all about it. I really am. I love, and that's part of my shtick, the personalist shtick. It's all about the people ultimately. And I love bringing in new people, new voices. So Bryce, tell us about yourself.
Yeah. Well, so I live here in Austin, Texas. I've got my awesome wife and 5 boys who are between freshman in high school and first grader. So our household is not calm. And I sort of split duties. I'm mostly I'm full time here as a family and youth pastor at a Baptist church here in Dripping Springs, and then also I help run a school that we founded in 2019, which is in Austin.
Nice.
So I'm kind of splitting roles there.
Well, man alive, we could talk about lots of stuff because I tried to start a school. Also,
did you? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, it's a long story. It's incredibly hard. So first off, it's amazing that a Baptist youth pastor, like that, I'm not just like nails on a chalkboard to you. That's interesting.
Well, I have Presbyterian roots. So yeah.
Believe in that. I don't know. Well, that's great. And So that's fascinating. I'd love to hear about your experience of starting a school. How old is the school, if I may ask?
Yeah, it's we're in our 5th operation year. We took a year to kind of study and get the model.
Yeah.
And it's a high school. It is a Christian school, but we don't have Bible class. It's very ecumenical. If you look at the statement of faith, it's Trinitarian, Nicene, and Apostles' Creed affirmation is the only standard. We're not, we don't have like and I'd say we have maybe a third that are regular church attenders, a third, occasional, and a third maybe completely unchurched. But it sort of has a missional feel in terms of just being planted in the city for the good of the city instead of I don't know. I think you know what I mean by this. There's a sort of a default Christian school culture where, and I love it. I mean, there's a big part of me that loves shields and crests and that conservative impulse to uphold tradition, but you walk a fine line when it's kind of speaking to what you were just talking about. About the temptation to idolize and lift up something that's important in the conserving impulse, but then what about the engaging and leaning forward? And so anyway, we started this school with an idea that you could think about it as head, heart, and hands need to integrate. And oftentimes schooling kind of separates us off into a bifurcation of the intellectual and the actual life.
Yeah, for sure.
So I could go off, but that was some of the thinking behind it, and it's been a huge learning adventure. So where did you start your school? What was the story behind that?
So it was a huge failure. But we tried to do it for a year before it kind of collapsed. And you just really realize when you try to do something like that, you just really realize how much work goes into it. It's a lot. And especially when you're in your kind of situation, like I imagine where you were, even when you started it with your kids and their ages and things, like, good grief. It's a lot of heartache. You really have to, one of the things I realized is you really have to, you have to have common, the people perish for lack of vision kind of a thing.
Yeah.
You have to have very similar vision or else it's just not going to work. And what happened with ours, and again, it's a proper relationship with that because everyone's going to have to die to a little bit of their idea of the exact proper vision. Yeah. And, you're going to have to work. You're going to have to be you're going to have to manifest a proper body.
That's right.
Or else the body will die. Yes. And it will separate and it won't work. And so you have to do that really well as the head or the founders. And so what happened with ours is there were 3 families, major families that tried to do it. And it takes a lot of finances up front. Yes. And that can just be a huge burden. We moved around a lot. And so we were in a situation. My background is that part of my own intellectual, spiritual journey growth, a lot of it centered around education. Because when my oldest was going to start school, I guess I decided to try to figure out what proper education was. Mm-hmm. And so, I read Lewis's Ransom trilogy, and then I read Abolition of Man, which is kind of a classic educational text.
Absolutely.
And then I read The Case for Classical Christian Education. I got really into classical. Yep. And
that was my roots before. I worked at 2 classical schools before this.
Yeah. And so I got really into that, and my kids went to some classical schools for a while, but then I went to a place, we lived in a town where there were just local Christian schools, to your point about kind of Christian culture schools. And I, for various reasons, just wasn't kind of interested in that. Cause I think there can be a lot of issues. That's a whole conversation of where I wasn't interested in doing. So I really wanted to start a classical school, and I would have called it classical Christian, but what would essentially happen is the 3 founding families didn't have common vision, and I ended up discovering 2 of the families, and they basically came out discovering that I ran into maybe one of the only, I don't know, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but there was a pastor in this town who was one of the founding members' families, and I mean, I don't know technically what you'd call him. I mean, I don't know if he was a narcissist, but he might have been a like legit sociopath or something. He's like one of the only people I've ever met where and almost like it was really hard for me to figure out. Like I had one-on-one faces with him because we were one of the founding things, and you had to negotiate this stuff all the time. And it got to this point where I was so confused by him and the things he would do and the other family. And the more we found out, we basically just decided like, no, we need to make sure this school doesn't succeed. We need to make sure this school fails. Like we need to tank it as quickly as we can because this guy's trouble. And so that's what ended up happening. But it was tough. I mean, so we were essentially like homeschooling for a year and then kind of doing this quasi private schooling, homeschooling thing for a year as we were trying to start this school. And then we ended up moving again. I mean, we moved a lot. And so, I mean, I've just seen a lot of schools. My basic experience with it is that it's kind of like, it's one of those things. It's just like the idea of a classical Christian school is real, but I don't know that I've ever really seen one in real life, really embody what I think is truly what a classical Christian school should be. But I've limited experience.
There's so much we could talk about.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. Hey, Chad.
Chad, what sayest you, buddy?
I don't know, man. I don't even know if I'm really connected here because I'm in probably another bad locale.
Oh.
But am I coming through?
Yeah, you are. You're a little quiet, but I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm just listening. Just listening. And being present.
Okay.
Present.
I think one of the things that we wanted to do in launching a school that has classical inspiration, but have you heard of, and Chad, this is like, I'm wanting to bounce off the fact that you're actually doing work with your hands. Classical schooling can be very cerebral and very, very wordy.
Yeah.
And it's very literary in its orientation, which is good. Neil Postman argues that's the definition, the essence of a school is to be a literary institution. So that's interesting. And you say you've never seen a functioning school. I've worked in maybe arguably one of the most successful classical schools, Christian classical schools in the country, a Regent School in Austin.
Oh yeah.
And it's very
looked into it, man.
Oh yeah. No, it's and there are huge benefits to that type of education. I'm not going to downplay it or badmouth it, but
they're balling too, by the way. Like
Did you?
Oh yeah.
Like they have nice stuff. They got money flowing into that sucker.
Yeah. Did you guys listen to McGilchrist and the dude from Hillsdale have their conversation?
No,
but that would be an interesting one.
Yeah.
It was just released, I think, yesterday. It was really, 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 really good. And they do get into education and all this kind of stuff. But I'll just tell you my quick, and then I'll get back to work here. But my quick experience with the classroom has been, and I used to think for many, many years after school that it was just because I was a bad student. But if you got me in a classroom, it would just kill me. And I would be almost falling asleep. I'd be nodding. I just could not connect. And I thought for a long time that was just ADD or ADHD or something. And then I ended up, getting out of school for all those years. And then eventually I had to do apprenticeship class for the union. And I kicked ass in the field. But as soon as we hit the classroom, it was just like the same thing. Like I just couldn't, I was almost, every time in the classroom I hit a certain time and I would almost be passing out, falling asleep. And I was trying to, and I liked the topics in that. I just could not. It was like, I would just fall asleep. And I don't know what that is. So I think it has something to do with just different models. I know that probably the majority of students don't have that issue. But like when I'm at work here, I can like I'm working, I'm listening to stuff. I can comprehend what I'm listening to. I can connect with the things I'm listening to. But in the classroom, it just kills me, man. It just and I can't. It's not because I don't
Chad,
want to.
what you're describing though, you're saying, oh, it might just be me. It's just like, in order to make kids able to pay attention, we have to give them amphetamines, right?
Yeah.
Like that. It's not just you just weren't drugged enough to find it interesting, apparently.
Oh man,
Or-
when they gave me the Ritalin and stuff, and I gave it away because it made me. I didn't like the idea of being alienated in that way. Honestly, it wasn't until like like a couple of years later, I was like, son of a bitch, I could have totally sold those or actually snorted them or something.
Yeah.
Because it's meth. You wonder why your kid is like, like little Timmy is so adamant on making sure the sandcastle is like made perfectly. It's because it's amphetamine salts.
Yeah.
So, Chad, what I would argue is this is the we versus the I. This is a proper body. I mean, they need to be in harmony. The student needs to be in harmony with the head and the teacher needs to be in harmony with all of the students in order for it to work properly. And it has to scale. It can't just be like an imposition from the top that imposes that like has to produce identical replicant students, because arguably you could debate that's what the American educational public school model does. Is their goal is to make taxpayers, citizens, drone bees. I would argue it's not meant to create people that are free thinking, alive people that are pursuing a true vocation. That's not what American education.
I wonder the role of love in all of this too.
Yes.
I directed a youth production of a Shakespeare play, and a big chunk of my job was not blocking and directing the show. It was every single rehearsal convincing the kids that this was the greatest play ever. Mm-hmm. They couldn't understand it. They couldn't appreciate it. It was a comedy too. It was 12th Night. So it's like, it's supposed to be funny and they don't understand the jokes. So to convince them, this is hilarious and this is great and you're going to do this and you're going to love it. Where I don't feel that love that I was instilling in the kids is a major part of a lot of education.
I want to be sure that we're pretty careful with a lot of this stuff, because you can't broad brush paint and say that it's the elusive they out there that are trying to stifle. I don't know if that's true. That certainly might be true in some cases, but and I know, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be pedantic with this, but it's just most people, I think, are completely asleep to what it is, the actions that they're carrying out in the lives of other people. And that is something that to me is more central topic than the elusive they out there trying to crush the spirits of people or something. I love you guys. I gotta get to work here, guys.
It's not even meant to be like a judgment on some whatever they out there. It's just a larger point that I'm trying to make, that if the head of any body, the educator, is in harmony properly with the students, like the role of the head is to, from a top down way, but in a should be a very egalitarian way, love all of the members of its body well. And how do you love every individual member of that body? I mean, be a good head, figure it out. I mean, that's your job. Mm-hmm. Michael, what up?
I just had to come and say hi because this is like all my favorite peoples. So two of my real life friends who I've met in person. David, someday maybe we'll meet in person. But
it's good to see you, Michael.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Texans.
Yeah.
Michael, you still have to come to Judge's Bible study today. You still must attend.
Well, I'm supposed to. We're leaving for family camp this afternoon, so I actually have to do work in a timely fashion today so that I get home when I'm supposed to. But I don't know. Maybe we'll see. Maybe I can do the thing with no no microphone, no camera on while I'm driving around. We'll see, but I don't know how safe that is. But it's safer. At least it doesn't look as dangerous if the camera's off. But
Yeah.
Well, I want to
Yeah, go.
back Michael. So Chad was just here, and now Michael and Matthew Crawford wrote a book called Shop Classes Soulcraft, and that was a huge inspiration for us taking our school in a different direction. Have you heard of that book, Matthew Crawford's?
Yes, I have it in my Audible, but I haven't listened to it yet because other things keep popping up. But
it's so good, and it's the thesis of the book is okay. So his story is that he did, like, I think it was poli-sci or something at University of Chicago. He had this like think tank, really swanky job where he was, just killing it in everything that our education system is designed to produce. And then he quits all that to open a motorcycle shop. And of course that echoes Persig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance a little bit, and some of the theme of we're living in this bifurcation of intellectual stuff and then materiality, and the whole goal of it is to find integration. And so I don't know, having Chad and now Michael, you jump on, I think that's an interesting question of like, how does embodiment become more focal and central? And Luke, you're saying something important too. We got to have like body integration such that there's a unified vision. But oftentimes what happens is that, students that are like Chad that don't find themselves turned on by Shakespeare or whatever, just feel like school is just irrelevant to them.
Well, my experience was I was in a class when they first started teaching me Shakespeare, and no one else enjoyed it. That I had the weird enjoyment of it, but then I realized that part of what my role was to teach affection for the material, and that the job of teaching is divided from the love of the subjects. And my wife had the same experience. My wife was I'm in Canada, so she was a French teacher for a while. And she picked the book, The Little Prince, to teach the kids how to read French, because that book is originally in French. And she did it in such a way that the kids left who hated French, loving the subject. And I think that love is not integrated all the way down. Like Luke, you were talking before about issues building the school with someone who was a narcissist, right? Like the idea that a lack of love can detonate what the purpose of education. Like if it isn't all the way down, if it isn't held together by a head that actually loves and cares for its members, then it implodes. There's no.
Because wouldn't you say that's what love is? Love is the proper unity and harmony of all the members in the way that they're meant to be operating.
That's right. Yeah.
I am. Oops. Sorry. Oh, am I back?
You're good.
I got to do some Shakespeare in high school too, and I think so. A couple things like that made it way more exciting was, first I got to see a couple plays done like at a college not far from where I lived by theater students from the college. And when you do obviously theater, it's always like the it's not subtle like movie acting, it's all overemphasized, and that really he makes it so much easier to get what's going on. Even though the language is hard, you get the gist, you can tell what's going on. By the end of the thing, like, it might take you a little while to catch on, but by the end of the thing, you know what's going on and who's who and what's happening, and then you can like really enjoy it. Where it's just like, if you try to just open up Shakespeare and read it, it's gobbledygook, it's impossible. But once you see what is going on and then you kind of get the gist of it, then you can go back and you can analyze it, and then you can get those clever twists and the turns of phrase and whatever you don't know, because you understand the whole overall message. You can then look up those words and get the meaning. so much better. And then the other thing that I had a lot of when I was a kid, because my mom studied, her dad was a professional artist. He like painted like magazine ads. And so she went to college to study art, and she like went to Italy and looked at all this stuff. And there was just a million like art books, you know, laying around the house. So like I had seen all this stuff growing up. But then she also would do like, she did a lot of sculpture and like, so like working with clay and stuff like that. And then it's like, even if you suck at it, like getting the experience of like, wow, it's really hard to make something look like something with clay. And then you see somebody who's great at it, you can like understand why they're great all of a sudden. It's just, you know, it's so that those kind of more embodied forms of the classical arts are really important beyond just the literature aspect. The literature aspect's like the hardest to sink your teeth into, I think.
Literally? Literarily?
No, literarily.
Sam, Luke, what up?
Hey. Well, I just kind of joined this conversation partway through, but I was in the greenhouse watering our plants, and I just felt like I had to hop in to talk about that form of education. I mean, so we've got twin boys, about to have another set of twin boys, so we're about to be raising, you know, at least 4 kids out here on our farm. And, you know, just I think a big part of education is just like, you know, this part of culture, right? You know, the agriculture, that rootedness to the land. And then, I mean, the humanities, absolutely. Like, I hope our boys love reading philosophy and Shakespeare. But I mean, to me, I think that embodied form of education and like a connection to a place is so important. You know, like that's honestly my biggest goal for our boys. I mean, I don't care what they do going forward, but just like having that background of a connection to place, you know, being able to grow things and build things. And if they want to pursue, you know, the life of the mind, that's amazing. Definitely want to give them the opportunity for that. But I mean, we're looking into like homeschool co-ops and, you know, things like that to have a community with similar values. But anyway, I'm just super grateful to have a place to be able to provide that kind of foundation for our kids.
Well,
Yeah.
Luke, I think what you were saying actually connects with what Michael was saying, in that the rootedness of Shakespeare is watching the play, or even more so performing the play, right? Versus being unrooted, disconnected from the physical. And just like what you're saying, like kids can be, you know, I knew people who really, really understood measurements, and they understood how to convert ounces to whatever. And they knew that because they were drug dealers. They had a topic that they loved. And so even though they did poorly when it was trying to be taught to them in school, they learned the exact same thing for something that they cared about.
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, you've got to have a why. Like, why is this important that I'm learning this?
Yeah.
And if it's, you're making money from your hustle, then there you go.
Yeah.
So a couple things, and I want to hear what Sam has to say. I think that's great, because I think you're going to be implicitly teaching all the really great heady things to your children by doing what you're doing, Luke. They won't necessarily have words for it, but that will come through their own personal development and individuation or becoming an adult. Is like they'll just have to figure out all that stuff that they know. They'll have to receive with meekness the implanted word, because you planted those seeds. That's what they're going to have to do. And I think this question is fantastic. Can you make a school that has something for everyone, or do you always have to pick a lane? I would argue that for those who have eyes to see, I think wherever you are planted, there is a proper school that you can make that will benefit who needs to be benefited from it. But it's not going to be universal, because you're not universal. You are Christ in me. You are not Christ.
Can I jump in on that one? We've tried everything. We've had our kids in private classical schools. We've homeschooled, co-opted. We've tried classical homeschool co-oping. We've even functionally been unschooling because with 5 boys at home, come on. Yeah, it's like, so not deliberate, but functional unschooled. And now our kids are all in public school. And I think my big takeaway on that is just, I don't know that any one school can be everything to every kid. It probably, there's a little bit of a Dunbar max number that you can functionally, successfully serve any group as an organization. But if you look for the good that's out there diversely manifesting in all these different areas with education, you can find it. And it's like, I kind of agree with what Chad said earlier, that we have to be careful when we get on education that we not paint with too broad a brush stroke. I've done plenty of that, where we just diss on the public schools. And I've seen, Luke, I love what you're doing with your kids with farming. Like, my kids' coaches out on the football field have done more to probably whip my boys in line and get them to turn work on time. And so I guess I'm not making a big statement there, but just a case for, if you look for something to appreciate wherever you are, you can often find it.
Ask not what your school can do for you. Instead, ask what you can do for your school.
Is that original to you?
Yeah, I made that up.
That's good.
I'm riffing off of someone else. Can't remember who.
Now more than ever, Sam. Now more than ever, it's so easy to just denounce. And there's with social media, there's a bit of a culture of that. Let's just get famous for denouncing, just like our elected politicians, and
protest
versus actually doing something to serve. Which is costlier, and it's not as sexy.
But it's also kind of easy because so many people are abdicating responsibility. I think that social media makes people feel like, oh, it's easy to complain, but it's impossible to ever change anything. And it's like, because so many people are apathetic and stuck on their screens and only want to watch Netflix at night or whatever, it's so easy to get involved and make a difference because you don't have a lot of competition. So that's
admirable. Like you playing school board.
I am on my local school board. I am an elected Illinois politician, so watch out. But it is really, it's easier to make a difference than you think if you actually just are willing to put in like a couple hours a month, so.
Okay, so Sherry's gonna click off, and I don't want to lose any viewers if Laura doesn't speak.
Yeah, why are people talking about me so much in the chat? That's funny. But
because
I guess I might have relevant things to say. I actually had some other questions, but I could also say things about education since that's
you can do whatever you want, Laura.
Well, I mean, with regard to schools, so you were talking about like what it's like to try to found a new school, right? And sometimes I have fantasies of founding a new school. But in fact, I work at a Catholic school in my town that's, a pretty normal school, right? It's been around for a really long time. It has like the normal school structure that you would expect, and it interacts with the state authorities in the way that schools generally do, right? All that kind of stuff. And I do find that there's some value to just being able to join an institution that already has all that stuff in place, right? And then just seeing if within your classroom you can do a really good job at whatever specific thing it is that you're trying to do, right? There is an advantage to doing that rather than trying to found a new idealistic project.
Because it's hard to think of all the skills and abilities and details that you lack or won't have thought of that are already embodied in these institutions that have been around for a while, even if they're not great.
And if you want to think of those things, try to start a school because they will become apparent to you.
And you will pay in ways you cannot imagine for a very long time.
Yep. It's hard. Yeah, reform is always better.
I want to put a lighter note too. There's also incredible support and incredible success that can come, but not without paying for it, and definitely not as a Lone Ranger. You need a supportive team around you, or you just can't do it.
School choice is so hard. I mean, it's been one of the hardest things about my wife and I, and we often talk about how, I mean, I don't know, it was just we both grew up in small towns, and so I mean, it was homeschool or public school, like that was it. That was the only choices that were available, you know. Sherry says, any thoughts on Montessori versus Waldorf? I don't know.
It's just evil theosophy. So why would you ever?
You know, something that's kind of cool in my town, we have a Montessori track within the public school that goes
Like
from
charter
kindergarten to it's just part of our public school district. It's not
Interesting.
even its own school. It's just in one of the
And
in an area of one of our public schools.
PVK's wife works at a Waldorf school that's also public, and that I don't know how that works, but California, I guess.
Yeah,
That
so
happens in Minnesota too.
yeah, I was kind of surprised that my little town has that, but they do, and it sometimes attracts people to come into our district, you know, from other districts because it's a neat thing to have. And it goes from kindergarten through 6th grade, and my kids were in it, and they enjoyed it, and yeah, the teachers are good. I was happy with the Montessori program that we had. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's a huge. I'm a huge advocate of breaking up the hegemony of public school funding. I think it's ridiculous.
Mhm.
That they're
I
the
think
only
it's
ones-
less ridiculous at the moment, but
Why?
Because I'm trying to, balance and take care of a public school budget, so I don't want any competition for those dollars going to someone else other than my school.
I mean, I guess I get it, but it's one of those ideas of like pride. If this becomes the only way to educate, and this is where we put all our money, because Minneapolis is dealing with this all the time. Like they're cutting arts and they're cutting all sorts of stuff because the amount of money. This is one of the big things that that Hope Academy that my kids went to for a while in downtown Minneapolis, which is a private Christian school whose whole mission is to give inner city kids who have no other choice an option of education other than the public schools, which are abysmal. And so they give free education, and their mission is to get 70% of the kids are either one or both of these things, which are low income and minority, and it's free. And they've worked it with the public busing systems and things. And like, it's a really cool school. Like their vision is, I know the founders in my book club now, actually, I was just at his house last book club, but it's a beautiful, beautiful vision. And there's a lot of heartaches with it, but it's a really cool place. But that's because the whole point with that is one of their advertising things is like they say this is what their tuition costs. I mean, it's free for people that can't afford it, but if you go there, if you're one of the people that can afford, you have to pay tuition. But their tuition is so much less, that the amount that it costs them to educate kids is so much less in the public schools, and they're doing such a better job. At some point, it becomes insolvent. You can't just keep throwing money at something where test scores are going down, dropout. Like, we're producing objectively worse and worse students. You can't just keep throwing money at it and hoping it's going to change.
Yeah, and I agree from experience that there are a lot of things you can do to improve education without money. Like you do, definitely schools need money. Schools need money for all kinds of things. But if there are things that you're dissatisfied with about the kind of education the kids at your school are getting, I assure you there are a lot of things that you can do that are free that will improve the outcomes. They take effort, but you don't necessarily need a lot of money to implement.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in general, in the abstract, I have to say that I really am pretty pro public school. I like the idea that there is the school that is sort of the main default choice, and it has to accept all comers, basically, legally speaking. And I think that public schools work best when they are small and have a lot of local control and influence. It's bad or difficult in a big city where there's like 7 school board members, say for the entire city of Minneapolis, which is like, who knows, like 400,000 or 500,000 people and however many schools. And it feels so detached and bureaucratic and mechanistic and, corrupt probably also.
No.
That doesn't work pretty well. Well, Chicago's corrupt. I won't project on Lilly, Minnesota, and
I'm just kidding.
yeah, but I'll just say the Chicago public school system is corrupt with a capital C.
Yeah, and then it's hard. Like the
Yeah.
Christian school issue is hard for me because I was so deep in these wells that the reason I even know about Regents is when we were once looking at this relocating. I don't know, I don't even know when this was. This was a long time ago, probably like 12, 13. I'm trying to figure out 12, 13 years ago when I was looking into all this because we were going to be relocating somewhere, looking for a job and a school, and we just looked nationally. And at that time, I was looking at classical schools, and so the Association of Classical Christian Schools that Douglas Wilson started, they didn't have like an interactive Google map to be able to coordinate all this stuff. And so I made individual Google Maps of every state, putting every classical school in the state because you could only search them out by their written address. And then I'd have to try to coordinate that with jobs, and it was just way too cumbersome. So I made maps that I think they eventually turned into the thing that those are interactive map that you now look at. And I looked at the regions, and because we were, Austin was an option. Austin had enough criteria that was befitting to me. If you can believe someone like me would move to Austin, 12 years ago. And but like my issue with it, and it's the same, we went to a classical Christian school in Minneapolis for a while when we were here. Our poor kids have been to so many different schools. And part of it's the culture war thing. It's weird. Like this school, the principal would do these AM radio talk shows with like this local politician about American politics that was like Rush Limbaugh or something. And I was like, no way. My kids are not, that's gross, not playing that game. And so then I wanted to leave for that because they were just wanting to make, little Christian nationalist soldiers. And I was like, nope, that's not the role of education. And then there's some place like, I don't know, I have problem with the money. Like Regents to me just looks like a super high-end rich kids prep school so that you can go out and win the American dream and conquer the world for Jesus and capitalism. And I'm just like, I'm not interested in that either, with like some Christian sprinkled on top, but I don't know that's with very little, it way better than me. I don't mean that as like an all out judgment. But it's just like, I have those fears, I guess. That's maybe says more about me than Regents.
There's some incredibly generous people there, and incredible. Like it's like anything, you dig beneath the surface, and you find that the reality is way more complex.
Yeah.
But that said, there are trappings, and you see this in all private schooling, where you get the temptation is to make it more about the club aspect, more about the reputation for being a really good, rigorous prep school, rather than the reality of what that actually involves. And so I don't know, man, you get Plato versus Aristotle plays out everywhere, It's just everywhere. The idealism versus the practical reality.
I wonder about what role outsourcing plays in this. So I think one of the biggest problems I have with public education is the notion that you are outsourcing the belief that the thing is working, and that like I think of certain things that my parents said, well, we just assumed they taught you that in school, right? Like I went to Catholic school as well, and my parents were very surprised that we didn't have a very Orthodox Catholic perspective coming out of Catholic education. And I was just like, you didn't what you ensured to occur occurred. You outsourced and just trusted an organization to take care of stuff. And so none of the things that you made sure happened. Like if my parents would ask me when I came home, did you do all your homework? I would lie and say yes, and they didn't check. And then they'd be surprised when my marks weren't that good. It's just like, check my work, make sure that I'm actually doing it, or that I'm actually learning these things, and then I will. And if you don't, then I won't, right? And I feel like a lot of public school system is an outsourcing, like they'll take care of it, right? You can't, communities that don't care about education can't get their children educated by the state. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. Totally agree with that. That's a really hard piece. And I just full on proper confessional mode. That's what I do. I love outsourcing education. I'm not that involved in my kids' education. They go to and it varies for kids from child to child how much they need that. But I have definitely
Also,
advocated that role.
Sometimes parents are trying to outsource certain things to schools, and then it turns out that the schools are actually trying to outsource those same things to the parents.
Yeah. That's good.
Well said. No, it's true. And there's a certain degree to which outsourcing is inevitable. If you're going to have a school at all, you are by definition, by sending your kids there, you're outsourcing certain aspects. But I think what you mean is trusting without verifying.
Yeah.
And
Well, and it, like, you know, I know people who are in the public school system or whatever, but they were, whatever their background was, the parents made sure that certain things were kept a priority, right? I knew science better than they taught me in school because my dad cared about those things. And so he wouldn't shut up about it at home. And so he ensured that I learned those things, outsourced history because my dad couldn't care less about history. And I went back and forth on how well I did it in history. The things that you, because Luke, you're saying that you don't, you're outsourcing your kids' education. That's fine. If you read with your kids or even introduce books to them that you think are great, then your kids get really good at that, right? That is, and I mean, you're an Orthodox Christian. You know, I don't think the public school is turning your kids into catechumens. So
They go to the elementary ones go to a Catholic school, which has been great. We've loved this little local Catholic school because it basically functions like an old school community public school almost, you know, with Catholic stuff, because it's just like this time pod from like the 50s and 60s. Like they don't, one of my kids is right here. There's some teacher there, like, how long has, there's a certain teacher that's been there. I mean, she said 65 years. I don't know if that's true, but like he's an older gentleman. And I mean, he was there as like a young man and he's been there the whole time. There's just a lot of that, which is great. That kind of constancy. And my wife has been great with the reading thing. This is where I am of so heavenly minded. I'm of no earthly good. And so thank God for my wife with my children. Like I would be a terrible single parent, but two brilliant ideas she had with kids. And this is for people with young kids. This is brilliant advice from my wife is we only let them watch screens when they were young. It's harder now when they're older in high school, in Spanish. And so they learn Spanish. Like they're all essentially fluent in Spanish.
That's amazing. That's brilliant.
Because it's just the pull of the screen. And if they're watching like old, you know, Disney movies or whatever, it's fantastic. And they didn't even know the difference. Oh, she just said, stop ruining other children's lives. This is my daughter. She's a whatever. That's hilarious. You will realize someday the benefit of being bilingual just automatically. You're welcome.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is reading a lot because they had limited screen time, they just all grew up reading a lot. So all of our kids just read a ton. And my wife is just like, I often think of that scene from Billy Madison where that lady jumps on the car when she's like taking his grandma to the old folks home. And he's just like throws the fast food on the windshield. He's like, here, eat this, leave us alone. That's where my wife's just like throwing books at our kids like that. Just like every good book she can find. She just read this, read this, read this. And they don't always read them, but often. So it's good.
Well, I just wanted to jump in real quick here. Sorry to, I'm a little late to the party, and I get punished for it because Sam left, and I saw his tagline. A little frustrated with the Orthodox right now, and as an Orthodox Christian, I wanted to come in and make him even more annoyed with them because.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask Sam what that was about too.
Well, I think it's just there's a lot of good reason to be annoyed. And I was Luke. I was listening to your stream, your stream of consciousness earlier here at the beginning, and talking about the access of identities. And what I think we're seeing right now, very clearly, is we're seeing these false unities form based off of these excesses. And what I mean by that is, if you've been in the Orthodox side of the internet for the last 5 years, you'll see, there's all these from a broad scope. It seems like there's some sort of unity here of these like kind of right-wing communities where you have like Jay Dyer and Father Peter Hears and the real Russia guy, World War Now guys, and there's all these different factions. They're almost like different factions within this bigger scheme, and it's like a bad mosaic where if you look closer, the further things are out of unison with each other. So that's all I wanted to really say, is that these excesses of the left or right hand, these things create very false unities that work for they shine brightly, they hold together rigidly for a little bit, but then it's like a brittle stick that you push one way or another and it snaps. So
I think that's very well said.
That's what I'm seeing.
Yep.
But what do I know? I'm just the guy. I got three little kids. I'm not as sage as Luke here. So.
Joseph, do you think that's a function of defining the center by what you oppose rather than what actually unifies?
Well, going back to what Luke was saying with Jordan Peterson's whole thing about vision being exclusion. You need to be bounded by something to see, and I think there's always going to be. I'm not trying to set up like a weird dialectic of some kind, but you need by necessity something that is exclusive. You need some sort of exclusion, right? And you need some. This plays out like seeing an enemy in somebody, and I think a lot of these guys on the right, excess of the right hand, they see the West as like this antichrist Christendom that they all are opposing for different ways and reasons, and that's adding to this false unity that is kind of binding them together. So I think exclusion, that's what dogma is. Dogma is exclusion. It's the boundaries, but it's not. You need form and substance. You need the form to contain a substance, and if I think that's what the sins of the left and right hand are, is overemphasis on form or overemphasis on substance. You lose the picture. The pie doesn't stick together. But yeah. So
good. Mark, Alan, or the floor.
Who's first? I got only negative things to say about school. I mean, my school. We have a dog.
I hear
and
that.
I think someone's just come in, so I might have to go. I had this little brief window where the children were in the yard. Hello, you're live on YouTube. I'm going to go. I'm sorry, folks.
No, that's right. It'll work sometime, Mark. No problem, buddy.
Sometime.
Yes.
Cheers. I'm still watching, though.
Good. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go.
Oh, yeah. That's funny. I'll pick up where Mark left off. I don't have kids, and I haven't been to school since I finished college. That's my dog that I have. That is actually very ill dog, unfortunately. But yeah, I don't know. I jumped in on this. Wow, geez, Chad. It's being put down momentarily, actually, later today.
Wow.
I kind of think education is like, and this is maybe an extreme position, and I don't have kids, yada, 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 all the disclaimers. Like, just education's a little silly. Like, I'm just someone who naturally likes to learn. I learned way more now that I'm outside of college than I ever did in college. College was about gaming the system to have okay grades, and I graduated, with magna cum laude, and I gamed the heck out of that system and took dumb classes to get A's, and and high school, like, what do you need to learn? Like, tell me that you don't have to boil down high school to maximum an hour and a half. Maximum. I'm talking 20 minutes. If you play YouTube videos at 1.75 speed, you could get all of a day of high school learning in 20 minutes. It's like 90% of it was just like, wait, just like, oh, we're doing a worksheet. Oh, I'm finished with it. Well, sit quietly until everyone, until I'm ready to start teaching again.
Or now for my son, it's just like, play games on your Chromebook.
Yeah, it's just like
95% of the day.
This is like insanity. It's like, like whatever your topics du jour are, whether it's reading and writing or it's logic and, whatever that is, I'm telling you, you could boil that down to teaching your kid everything you need to know about whatever that subject is in 3 years, doing an hour a day.
You are currently describing homeschool. My wife was homeschooled for a period of time, and that was like, she talked about the amount of time you just had. You were done school by noon. You wake up, you work on your stuff. Her mom wasn't having to deal with a classroom of kids. She was done by noon, got to play, got to do whatever. They would go to the cottage, or they had a trailer for a while, and they'd be on vacation while she was schooling, just because school only took like 3 hours.
Yeah. It's just, sorry, continue.
Well, what I was going to say is I don't know. I will say a lot of controversial things about education. I think depending on what you're doing, I mean, a lot of this is reminding me of is it out yet? The Jordan Hall conversation with Paul, anyhow. But that conversation with Paul reminds me of a lot of this, because Jordan's own education is, he said he wasn't a particular good student, which obviously he's smart. But then he was good at taking tests and took like the, SAT, and got a full ride to Texas A&M with like beer and pizza money on top. And then he got done and took his LSAT and got into like Harvard and Yale and all this. So obviously he's smart, but he's just like, there's this great article. I think it's by Simone. How do I say this, Laura? Is it Veil? Simone Veil?
Oh, Vey. Yeah.
Vey. Simone Vey. There we go. And it's one of the best things. Dorothy Sayers has written many great things on it. But there's this Simone Vey article somewhere that I have somewhere around here. And basically the point of it is that her contention is that education is about attention. The whole point of education is learning how to pay attention. And then she says, when students know, when a learner knows how to pay attention, then they apply that liberal skill anywhere, to any art. That's what the proper liberal arts is the ability to pay attention. And then when you know how to harness
desires,
to
harness desire.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what paying attention is not just being caught up in your desires and your passions, tossed to and fro to whatever's going on in your passions. That's the hedonism,
I mean, that that's an interesting idea for sure. But I also feel like, I don't know. Sometimes, maybe you're not saying that this is how currently anything is taught, but sometimes there are these sort of meta descriptions of education where it's like, oh, the wash on, wash off was always your defense mechanism. I'm like, no, this was a bunch of underpaid people who did not care about me, who, so saying like, oh, it's okay if you want to throw in some meditation into your teaching. That's also what I understand to be what I understand meditation to be. You can meditate for an hour, half an hour a day, and call it your liberal arts education. I don't know. It just seems like people are now like giving this like wash on, wash off was always, it's like, no, I kind of think that a lot of my education was not really done with me as like in mind. It was sort of either to free up parents to do this or do that. So I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that if that's what education was, I've never heard anyone.
Well, I don't think most educators are actually doing that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But yeah.
so laying my experience up against what you've just said about your own experience, I'm like, oh yeah, I actually had a tremendous capacity to curiosity and desires to learn many different things. I mean, I taught myself how to play guitar at the age like 10 and all those different kinds of things. And I really loved to learn things. I just could not. For some reason, there was like and maybe this is actually perhaps tied to what kept me from taking interest in the church, but there was something that was just so punishing about the education system itself that was completely draining. And so, yeah, I wonder if like if I had more intentional teachers, a lot I do think has to do with the fact that my parents did not actively encourage. So like my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, they sing with their children, they read with them, they go out, they play with them, they're right in there with them, and so they're harnessing that desire from like the ages 0 on up. And so I'm wondering, that's got to be, encouragement has a lot to do with this. I remember specifically really loving I used to, I don't know, I must have been 4 or 5, and I was reading the choose your own adventure books, and I remember specifically being so intensely reading these things, and I went to tell my mom's boyfriend and my mom about this, and they just were like, blew it off like it was nothing. And then from there on I didn't read until I became an adult and actually got sober and and then I took an interest in literature. But jeepers, man, it's not like we don't have a capacity or a strong capacity to learn or desire to do so. I got to roll. Bye.
Yeah, I think Chad just hit the nail on the head. Like, it's easy to teach the kids who come from good families and who you can, as a teacher, I look back, I like to take credit for a lot of, good influence that I've had, but I've realized that the truth is I benefited a lot from that secondary support, from that, you would call it primary support, right? What do the parents care about? How has that affected? How has that shaped and formed their kids? And yes, it's a coordinated thing, but if you had a kid who was motivated more by what they're doing physically, what they can make, what they can produce of value. Like one of our former students, he did welding and sign making and, started his own business. And, as we were starting our school, we realized like very little of what we were doing in the classical education world fed directly into that and had anything to say as far as encouraging innovation, being a pioneer, being an enterprising. So I don't know. I sort of sit at that boundary line, and I'm asking, how can we do both? But how can we especially find the kid that's alienated and finding themselves experiencing what Chad's experiencing? Is there a way to maybe orient it more towards projects, more towards, you take a final exam and it just goes into the drawer of a teacher somewhere and is forgotten. What about helping kids from a young age start to actually produce things of value? And again, not saying there's anything wrong with that more cerebral approach. You have to have that too. But where's the creativity and the open-mindedness?
Well, one of the places I found it growing up was actually Boy Scouts, and that's such an interesting organization because the Scouters weren't paid, right? This was not their job. This was something that they had to have some level of interest themselves. It involved physical embodiment. Like so much of what Boy Scouts is embodiment, right? Like you're learning first aid, you're learning about the human body in a way that's just like, because something has gone wrong, this is how we are going to fix these things. It's not just like mere flipping through pages on a biology textbook. It actually is. You're learning about the most basic ways you can die. You're learning about the most basic functions of yourself. And then you're enacting those things, right? Like we had this one camp that was like a survival camp where we were not given tents. We had like tarps and ropes and had to build a shelter. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, at like 1 o'clock in the morning, the leaders came and cut the ropes so that we had to figure it all out in the middle of the night. right? Like that was one of the things that was part of what you were training to do. And that was such an interesting organization too, because we did, like, they opened it up so that women could be part of the Boy Scouts, which led to people dating in Scouts, which was very strange. But no matter what they did, it attracted way more men than women, right? And so it was this, like, people now talk about how school is so almost designed perfectly for girls and not for boys. And so to be part of something like Scouts, I feel like gave me something that school was not giving. People were volunteering, so you knew they cared about it. Everything had to be embodied. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, being exposed to the world and the incentives and the carrots and the sticks of just the world, like you're on a, you have a problem, people are going to solve it. You see Michael Jordan dunk a basketball, you're going to pick up a basketball and be like, I want to dunk a basketball. But that's going to happen in its own times and its own places. But saying like, all right, sit in this, like, oh, we're going to bring in the inspirational guy. And, oh, this is an inspirational speaker. It's like, that is almost inherently a contradiction to say, oh, they're just going to inspire you. It's like, just take the many, many things that have to come into like actual inspiration or actual creation of desire. It's so complicated. And so, I mean, it just comes down to school is designed to babysit kids. If you tack on after school programs, I wonder why school starts at 8 a.m. And then if you tack on after school programs, ends roughly around 5:30.
Well, especially when we know that the kids all do better at school if we started at 9. They've done the study repeatedly.
Yeah.
No, like, it's not even debatable. We know it's not designed for the education of kids because we know what would be better.
Yeah.
This is kind of like, it reminds me of Sherry's gonna come on, I think, and take over, and I'm gonna bow out. But it reminds me of I think it's a fascinating thing to think about. An architect said this. I can't remember who it was, but they said we need to start thinking of architecture as an outflow of the soul of humanity, in the same way that like ants, like an anthill, it just is what's coming out of ants. It's just what ants do. And all beings are that way. They make and create things that they live in that is an outflow of which is why architecture will tell you a lot about the health of a culture or a society. But in the same way, the way you design your educational system, to your point, David, and what everybody was just saying, it's the same thing. Like, what are you trying to do? Well, you're creating daycare babysitters so that mom and dad can be out both working, so they can make taxes and consume the things that this consumptive machine is making. We got to keep consuming things and paying taxes. Like, that's what it's meant to do. School's tied to that.
But I mean, I don't know. I guess I care more. But like, you can say, oh, well, they just need babysitting because mom and dad need to do important stuff. And then you can say school is incredibly important because if you don't have school, you're an idiot. But you can't say both. You can't say abandoning your kid to do something important and doing the most important thing for your kid.
Well, I don't think it is an important thing. I think that's a lie. That's
yeah. Exactly. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. And I just think that, like, it's annoying that, like, school should just be like kid prison. We should just call it like kid prison. Right. Because that would just or like, kid penitentiary or whatever word, like, that would clarify.
I have teachers in my family and teachers that I'm friends with. And during the pandemic, it was just so I hated it because it's fine if people call you a hero, but teachers would post things about how they were heroes. Just like, you don't get to say you are a hero. We can tell you that, but you gotta.
So as somebody who is currently working in a school, I kind of feel obliged to stick up for them by saying that they are doing some things of value some of the time.
I don't even look at teachers on the street. I avoid eye contact. I won't touch their hand. I spit when I see a teacher. I get so mad.
That's amazing.
I go to school sometimes just to get angry, and I drive by and I'm just cursing and spitting at them.
Just to be clear, a big part of my criticism is because my wife, when we first got married, was a teacher and taught for many years. So it's not. and some of the people who instilled in me some of my greatest passions in life were teachers, and they did an absolutely phenomenal job. But I also had a lot of teachers that were very, very clearly wanted to do something else and got a degree in teaching just in case that didn't work out, and it didn't.
Yeah, but
there's a lot you can. There are a lot of valid criticisms of school as it exists. But let's just say this: like, if we had the society that we have now, and we just suddenly abolished all school, so that suddenly no children were going to school ever, what would we put in its place? Or maybe that's the wrong question. But like, what would people be doing with their day instead, and what would they get out of those things?
We found out when COVID happened, and it turns out it was a disaster. It really was not a good thing to all of a sudden not have school. So I love that point, Laura, and I echo what you're saying. Just, yes, you can criticize. You can find things to criticize in all manifestations of school: private, homeschooling, public. We've done all three. Again, I think the thing to do is to look very concretely into your local circumstances, and it might be that homeschooling is the best thing for you, or if you have the means, you can do private. But getting involved in what's going on in the local, and even charter school, you haven't mentioned that. I think we should also be thankful that there are so many options, and sort of ask the bigger comparative question, which you just posed, Laura, which is, what's the alternative?
Yeah, I mean, one thing here that I would jump in on is I think that we have a tyranny of language problem, where like there's no world in which people don't teach people things. Like, that's impossible. Like, it would just be physically impossible to do that. Like, someone who works at a public school and stands in front of 30 kids and has whatever 6 periods on, 2 periods off throughout the day. That's one thing. But the idea of the concept of someone teaching something, like, I worked at a summer camp, and I talk about it in my randos and other places. I loved it. It was one of the most important things in the world. I taught tennis. I guess you could even call me a tennis teacher, but we never used the word teacher. We just were like, yeah, kids need some rough organization. They need things to do, things to care about. But the idea that, like, you escape from, just this I think it's the formalized structure that I'm sort of pushing against, because yeah, there are a lot of schools that seem to do it, but the vast majority are pretty fallen into, I've never seen a lot of schools throughout my entire life where there were no desks, no chairs, like the formalized, 10 by 5 blocks of chairs, or 10 by 3 blocks of chairs and desks is pretty standard. So, I mean, yeah, obviously teaching is going to happen, all these things, but like reimagining them and starting in a new place. But yeah, so I don't want to just.
Well, you can also reimagine things gradually, right? You can make gradual adjustments to an already existing thing. That's sometimes a good way to go, unless the thing is so ossified for various reasons that you really can't make gradual adjustments to it.
I'm wondering as well about what YouTube has taught us, because you have a lot of people who didn't do particularly well in school, or not particularly interested, and spend all their free time watching lectures. Right? Is that there clearly is some kind of an issue if people are seeking education more outside of school than within it. And I even think of like little things. My wife used to come to a Bible study, and she could only pay attention if she was knitting during it. She was like, if I don't have knitting needles, I can't pay attention. It's too boring. And it's like she could engage in conversation, but it needed the knitting needles. Otherwise, it was a no-go.
I'm just wondering if Zach and Mark have something to add. I don't know. Did you say anything yet, Zach?
No. I was wondering if the thing would swing back to the ecclesiology questions about John Behr. But on the school thing, that YouTube point is actually interesting. I reckon this goes all the way up to university level. I think that I probably developed more as a philosopher from private reading and watching lectures on YouTube than I did like doing a master's degree in philosophy.
Wow.
And that's ridiculous. That just should not happen.
Well, I just point out that it makes more sense. Like, you don't need permission to read books, you know? Like, if you want to do that, you should do it, and if you don't want to do it, you shouldn't. But the idea of like, I'm in a program or I'm being told to do this, motivating you is kind of like, unless it's like a body that you have to participate in, like an army, where the only reason you do it is to participate in this larger thing. But philosophy, from what I understand, can be done by individuals. So what about it requires
at a
books
university,
are only available.
You've got
Sorry,
access
continue.
to being able to ask questions to the academics. You going to seminars, right? It was the quality of all that, and actually not the quality, the telos of what that was pointing towards at a secular university was still so far off where it should be that it was just progressing in a different direction. So it was still a lot of progress and a lot of stuff, but it was progress towards being able to argue for 3 hours about whether a chair exists rather than what is the good life, right?
Why is it always a chair?
I don't know why it's always a chair. That's always the example people use, isn't it?
Yeah, I know.
Because if you're a philosopher, you're spending your whole time sitting in a chair. It's the first thing you think of. That and a table. Tables come up.
If I could add something to that, I feel like one thing that's been mentioned is about love and desire, and I feel like, so much of my experience with education has been the shaping of desire, the shaping of love, and just related to what you were saying, Zach, about getting a PhD in philosophy. I have a master's degree in horticulture because I wanted to learn to farm. I love farming, love plants. And honestly, that master's program just sucked the love out of farming for me. And it took me a while to bring the love back. And I feel like so much of education is like the cultivation of the love for the thing, which then motivates a person to get to know it in a very embodied way. Or it could be, scholastic. But to me, I just saw in my own life a perfect example of the academic pursuit of the thing actually being counterproductive to me being able to continue to do that thing, in horticulture specifically. It was just so scientific, materialist. It just disenchanted everything I loved about agriculture, and turned it into, collecting repeated measures on plants, to run statistical analysis. And it probably took me, 3 years after I finished my program to actually want to garden again because I just lost the love, I don't know if anyone can relate to that.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah.
I
think it's definitely true for a lot of
it's
things.
weird how similar that is from something incredibly practical like gardening to something where you're sitting in a chair thinking in philosophy. That I could say no, exactly the same thing.
I can say the same. My master's is in theology, and if you're not really careful, what's the joke? Seminary is cemetery, and it's that isolating the propositional mode of learning.
Is it like a reciprocal narrowing? That's what it feels like to me.
It can, because when you prioritize the academic over the participatory, and I went to a seminary that really tried to balance that with the practicum, with daily worship. So it wasn't like they were unaware of this problem, but it's just there's such a strong scholastic bias in our Western education that we really do prioritize the propositional over participation, procedural, right, perspectival, and it's very difficult to build an institution that has any credit where you're balancing that out. It's not.
I would
go ahead.
I would diagnose the problem slightly differently, I think, than the propositional participatory framing there, in that it's an over-egging of analysis in the proper sense of the word analysis, which is breaking things down into their constituent parts and looking really closely at them. But analysis with no telos to that analysis. That you can't just break down the things and look at them in their smaller chunks. And so partly this is biased from me coming from a background of an analytic philosophy department, analytic philosophy being the key term there, right? That's become the dominant mode of philosophy in Britain, at least, and I think in America as well.
I kind of want to
do anything.
Oh, sorry. I want to throw my hat in the ring a little bit because I mean, my kids are all grown up now and gone, but when they were in public school, they were like, when they were little, we were living in Switzerland, and Switzerland has a really interesting educational system because they have a streaming system. So you go to school from, kindergarten to 6th grade. And then at 6th grade, everybody gets streamed out into these different areas according to their performance from grades 1 to 6. And so children are often faced with like life questions at the age of 12. Like they have to decide what they want to be, or where they want to.
It's not all their decision, though, is it? Don't the teachers kind of decide? Oh, is it in Switzerland?
Yeah, it's pretty much. Well, I mean, it's their decision as far as the category that they fall into, right? So if their marks are such and such, they're going to go down this path. There's 3 paths basically. There's like trades,
it's like Germany.
Shoe salesman, hairdresser, that kind of thing. And I mean, they do apprenticeships for waitressing in Switzerland, like, and everybody gets a decent wage. Like, don't get me wrong. That's why Switzerland is so expensive, because everybody gets a living wage. But, and then of course the third path is university. And then in between there is, well, what I would just call bureaucracy, or desk job kind of thing, banking, whatever.
Right.
But, and so within their category, the kids can choose what they want to be. And if they don't know, they've got like career counselors, and those people are essentially filling out, like they've got spreadsheets of what's missing. We're going to run out of these people in 2 years. So they direct the kids accordingly, right? And it's not always in the kids' best interest. It's mostly in the interest of the society in general. And it's very, it sounds really good. And it is, in some ways, it is good because it's good for the society as a whole. But in other ways, you get a lot of people in their jobs who are really miserable. And as far as I know, I don't know if it's still the same now, but years ago, Switzerland had one of the highest rates of suicide in the world. And I think I personally put it down to the educational system doing that to people, because oftentimes people found themselves in jobs that they didn't like, and that they weren't suited for. But to get out of that, like to retrain, because everybody's a specialist in the country, right? Like even the waitress is a specialist. And so to retrain and do something else, you can't just hop into another. You've got to go back to school. You've got, and then the cost is on you. They just make it difficult to do that. So, and then the other thing I wanted to say was, because of the rigidity of the system, a lot of the kids are like, there's a kind of a uniformity to what what the public school looks like, right down to, these are the things they can bring for lunch. They can't bring anything outside of this category,
Oh, that's interesting. Well, my kids used to go to school with kids who brought like pixie sticks for lunch. So I can kind of see why you would implement a rule like that.
Yeah. And it wasn't really about that. It was about not causing envy in the other children. That's what it was about.
Okay.
And when my oldest daughter was in grade, I think it was 2. She got to grade 2, and so they have a teacher from grades 1 to 3, and then they have a second teacher from grades 4 to 6. Through same teacher for all those years, and her teacher, by the time she got to grade 2, her teacher called me and said she felt that my daughter needed to see a psychiatrist, and she wanted, and this is a thing in the school system, that they'll send kids to psychiatrists if they detect anything out of the ordinary. And ordinary is like literally what they deem ordinary, including the lunch. Okay. So I went to visit her and I asked her what she thought the problem was. I was looking for learning disabilities, things like that. She said, well, she's too open and friendly. And I was like, what?
Switzerland.
What? Right? And so anyway, long story short, I pulled her out of the public school system. And because you can't homeschool in Switzerland, I put her into a Montessori school.
But you can't
But then
homeschool at all in Switzerland.
No, you can't homeschool there unless you're a teacher. Unless you're actually a
nor
teacher.
can you in Germany. I understand.
Yeah, I don't know about Germany, but
yeah, I think that's true of Germany as well.
Yeah. So then, because the Montessori school it was a registered school, but it didn't give grades. They gave written reports because they had this holistic, way of doing things. She fell out of the school system, and the Montessori school only went to grade 6. And so when she got to grade 7, she had to go back into the public school, but they had no grades and they didn't know where to put her because of their streaming, right? So they put her in the lowest possible spot with the dumb kids, which I don't like to say, but just to make it simple. And so I made a deal with the school trustees that she could test her way out of that into the next level, right? Eventually, because their complaint was that she didn't have any notes, or marks, right? She had no marks. So then her teacher was supposed to practice the entrance exam for the next level up, and he decided that she would never make it anyways. So he just didn't do it. So then I got mad and I told him to give me the tests, and I tested her, weekly for months to get her prepared for this test, because actually the Montessori never tested. So she didn't even know how to do a test, right? So she had to practice doing tests. So then, long story short, I got her, she wrote the test. She passed with flying colors into the next level. But we had decided at that point in time to move to Canada. So she actually wasn't going to go back to school in Switzerland. And the school board trustee phoned me to tell me that she had passed. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. Because my daughter was at this point where she just thought, Mom, I can't do it. My teacher doesn't believe in me. I'm not able. I just don't get it, blah, blah, blah. And I really felt like she needed to know she could do it. That was the most important thing for me. And then I got this phone call, and the teacher said to me, or the trustee said to me, your daughter passed. She's, she can go to the Realschule, which was the second level up. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. I said, but we're actually not even going to be here. We're moving to Canada. And she said, what? Did you know this when she took the test? I said, yeah, I did. Well, now we've had all this work around her, and you're not even going to be here? I was just like flabbergasted. I thought, aren't you an educator? Like, don't you care about what this kid thinks she can do or not do? Right? She was just upset that I gave her a whole bunch of work to do when I knew that I wasn't coming back, you know? Oh, man. And then we moved to Canada and I homeschooled because we were living way out in the wilderness and there was no school available. And I did each of the kids differently. So I put my son was just, you know, he could just go. And I put him into a government program, a distance education program, and he just worked on his own and very rarely had to ask me a question, you know. And then my youngest was just starting school, so I just did, you know, kindergarten, grade 1, 2, and 3 with her myself. And my oldest daughter had to learn English. She spoke it, but she didn't read and write. So we did that for a year, and then she wanted to go into the actual public school on the reserve in the town that we lived in, which was like unheard of. There were no white kids in the First Nations school, not because they weren't allowed, but because none of the white kids wanted to go. And there was a, you know, quite a racism issue on both sides of the equation there. But she did really well there, actually, because she was so open and friendly. You know? And so anyway, I've had this like love-hate relationship. And then the other two, we moved here where we were, you know, we had access to a school bus and they could go to school. And so when they got to high school age, I let them, I gave them the choice because I felt like, yeah, this is the time when you really need to, you know, bump up against some peers and find out who you are, right? But it was super interesting living in Telegraph Creek because all the white kids there were homeschooled. And one of the things that my husband and I found fascinating was that these kids could, like, when we had get-togethers, and we had them all the time, that was our social, you know, getting together was social life, you know. People were constantly hanging out and having dinners together and just getting together. And the kids would all sit at the table with all the adults, ranging from, you know, adults that were in their 80s to young parents, and participate in conversation. Like, they were completely socialized in a way that, you know, I kind of mourned when, like, my oldest daughter was in her early teens in Switzerland. She was already isolating away from the adults. Like, you know, we hear about the generation gap, right? But it's because they spend so much time with their peers. They actually haven't engaged in the adult world, and they don't know how to engage in it. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I lots of thoughts, but
that just made me think, Sherry. So much of education is preparing children for the world they're going to enter, and I feel like, you know, being a millennial myself, I'm 35. You know, we've got 3-year-olds and then more kids on the way. I don't know what the world's going to look like.
No.
You know, I think that's what makes making these decisions about education so difficult. Is just because, I mean, I know the world's going to change, but I don't know how it's going to change. You know, and I mentioned earlier, we're considering homeschool, you know, forming something like a homeschool co-op, but like, who knows? You know, who knows what values are going to be like most relevant for the world.
Well, you know, I always just thought to myself that whatever I put into my children, I'll get out of them. Right? I mean, I think that's just common sense, really. Like, it's not rocket science. And when they're absent, I don't know what's going in there. And I think at least the first 7 years are fundamental to developing character and who they are. And from there, they can pretty well navigate, you know, on their own. But yeah. Anyway.
I agree. Right now, we're at a phase of life where I'm very thankful that our kids are in the public schools. It just, it just is our reality now. But I'll tell you, Sherry, I agree. The time when I look back at photos of when the boys were all at home, this was pre-COVID, and we were homeschooling all 5 of them. There were some pretty sweet moments. We would do dress up history events, and it gave an opportunity to do things as a family that we otherwise wouldn't have had. And they talk about laying the tracks, and I'm thankful for that time.
Well, one of the things I can say about homeschooled kids, if they're homeschooled well, like there are a lot of homeschooled kids who are just not schooled, right? But if they're homeschooled well, one of the things that stands out to me about most of them is that they're self-starting. Like they're always well motivated. And like, even though my kids all graduated from public school systems, none of them fell into anything conventional, So they all did what they wanted to do. And my youngest was the only one that actually attempted university. She did like 3 or 4 different semesters in 3 or 4 different universities. Every semester she's like, I want to go here instead, and made her way around. And in the end, she got married, and her and her husband opened a CrossFit gym, and and my son is he's a producer in Berlin, makes his own techno music, started a label with a group of people, and then was a CEO of a music school there, So, and they all kind of slipped in under the, outside of the regular entry points in those societies. And then my oldest daughter, she's basically a mom, but she's a photographer. She paints, she has a little massage therapy practice in her house, so they're all very self-starting and well, I would say even creative, which is great. I'm really proud of them, actually. And their educations were piecemeal. Like it was a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit, and then some butchering of chickens and digging holes and, all that kind of thing. Hunting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was something about at least my schooling. I mean, the British system is probably very different to the American one, but that definitely did not encourage and probably actively discouraged that kind of self-starting mentality, because I was mostly incentivized to appeal to the authorities above me and do what would please them. That's what I've been used to doing. That's what I'm quite good at, being able to take the right tests and then have people say, oh yes, he's one of us, let's raise him up. And that's,
well, I mean, when I went to public school, we had, we used to stand up in the morning and sing God Save the Queen and say the Lord's Prayer. And then we all sat down and our hands had to be on our desk and our fingernails had to be clean. And the bell would ring and we would get up and line up, and then we would exit the building and go out into the playground. And if we got beat up, tough shit, don't tattle. That was the thing. Don't tattle. And then the bell would ring and we'd line up at the doors, and then we'd all shovel in a nice, neat line. Like it was, and I remember reading in my homeschooling days, reading books about how these school systems were designed to build factory workers. And I'm like, yeah, get used to the bells and the times and lining up, and don't complain.
Yeah. I mean, along with that, like, I just think the language is just so, I mean, these are awesome stories and thank you for sharing, Sherry. But it's just, the language is just so, it's like, how much of this is just being alive? Like, oh, people before the 1700s, they just laid on the ground and it didn't move because they weren't educated, you know, like they didn't do anything. They just, oh, we need the school. And we, you know, some brilliant teacher finally like running up to a guy with a bottle of water being like, here, you need to sit in this chair for 8 hours. I must, you know, like, it's just, I'm like, running around, like having examples of beauty, collective groupings, sports, like that's just what humans do if you just leave them alone. Like people want to play together, people want to be together. Obviously it's not, you know, this isn't like Lord of the Flies. We don't just like like you lock them in a room and they'll, you know, they'll recreate some, you know, perfect, you know, society. But it just like, I mean, I just keep coming back to like, what's education here? Like, oh, is me making a sandwich because I'm hungry? Well, you saw the knife and you dipped it in the peanut butter and you educated. It's just like, okay, we could analyze it that way, or we could just say like, I was hungry and I made a sandwich, and you know, I want to have friends. I want to have friends. How do I have friends? Oh, when I hit the other kids, they don't want to be my friend. Okay, I've learned this pattern of behavior. Is that education, or is that, you know, just being alive? Is that just part of community? You know, so sorry not to cut you off, but just like these precise distinctions, I'm like, how much of this is education? How much is like human beings have always just found ways to do these, to transpose these values? Sorry, I cut you off, Sherry.
No, you didn't. I was interrupting you, but I was just wanted to say, like, to Zach's point about YouTube University. I mean, I have learned so many things and gotten really, really good at them. And I'm a total visual learner. Like, if, you know, to learn a technique or a skill or something, I can't just read about it and do it. I have to see someone doing it. And then I'm like, okay, I got that, you know? Of course, then it's trial and error, right? But if you know, where were her hands in that, you know, how did she hold that thing? Oh, okay, got it, you know? And I think YouTube is really, really, in that respect, I think it's fantastic. Just fantastic.
So true. When I was in university and even in grad school, YouTube hadn't really emerged. The internet hadn't. It was on the verge of becoming this alternative source where you could go find what you needed. But I thought about how much the internet and YouTube have changed the meaning of the university library. When I would go, it was a place very, very valuable to be, because it had, well, as the university was, to be on campus meant to be in the same zip code with people who'd really done their homework and who could teach you things that you didn't know, could lead discussions that you didn't have access to. Nothing was stopping you from having it at the local bowling alley, but it just wasn't likely to happen there. But in a seminar room and then on the library shelves, and I love that. So we're talking, you know, that's in the 90s, early 2000s when I finished up grad school, and how much has changed that now we can do this. And why are we doing this? Because YouTube has introduced what used to happen only in seminar conversations. It's awesome.
Yeah, and people can pursue the things that really interest them, which I think just makes it that much more meaningful, right? They're not subjected. Like my son, he did several years in the Montessori school, starting from kindergarten, and I put him in school at age 4 because he really needed that kind of socialization. My daughter, I put in school at the age of 7 because she didn't need socialization. And she was the open and friendly one, you know. And but I remember when he got back, so we put him still in Switzerland back into the public school for 1 year. And he'd come home from school and he'd just be like, Mom, I'm so bored. I'd say, well, what is it that you're bored of? Well, I'm done and everybody's still working on their stuff, you know? And because in the Montessori school, you could self-pace, right? So you just, here was your guidelines for the day. You worked through it. You could do whatever you wanted first and whatever you wanted last. And, you know, if you wanted to lay on your stomach and do it on a mat or sit in a chair or hang from a monkey bar, like they didn't care, right? And it was great. And yeah, there was something else I wanted to mention too about YouTube. But anyway, I forgot it.
Is the conversation we're having about education and pointing to this tension of freedom and form, is that not in some way parallel to the things we're wrestling through with religion in general in society and also with family? I'm just thinking about like the three institutions that make up social life: faith, family, and education. Our moment is that we're really wrestling with the tensions of freedom and form.
I think that plays a big role for sure. Yeah. This is a good question here. If natural, normal socialization is education, then does that make school anti-education? I actually think there is something to that, because one of the things that I thought a lot about was the fact that we're sticking children in to, like, I don't know how long the days are, 6 hours or what are they? I don't know, in school, but they're stuck in a setting with people their own age, and children are meant to emulate. Like that's how they learn who they are, right? By looking up to people who they admire, right? That's what children want to do. And there's no one to emulate, maybe the teacher, but none of their peers are really fall into that category because they're all the same. Like there's this monotony, some kind of like psychological monotony to, you know, capsuling children off with people their own age for that many hours in a day. Personally, that's what I think. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, it's like we talked about earlier. I mean, a current educational form in public education is preparing factory workers who, in the factory, they would be with peers their own age, and they would listen to a boss who was above them, and essentially just do what they were told. So, I mean, that's the form fits the function. I think why we're having this conversation is we don't want to prepare our kids to be factory workers. There really aren't any good factory jobs anymore. Like, what are we preparing our kids to do? And so then the education needs to take the form of that, you know, whatever that goal is that telos. And that's kind of what I was getting at before. I mean, and I think, Sherry, like your story just points to, you raised the kids and, you know, they were in multiple educational institutions in very different settings. And it seems like they're very well adapted to kind of find their niche in a world where they can travel, they can live overseas. You know, it seems like that really worked out because that's the world they live in. But yeah, I just have the feeling, I mean, yeah, kids sitting down in a classroom in rows of seats listening to a teacher for 7 hours a day, that's not the world they're going to enter. Yeah, why are we still doing it?
and actually, you know, there's something to consider is that as small children sitting in that classroom looking at that teacher in the front, that is the world for them.
For them, yeah.
It is. Like,
yeah.
Right?
Yes.
It is their world.
How does I don't know the history of the whole preparing people to work in factories thing. How does that align with the so I went to like a pretty posh English private school, right, where we'd be doing that same thing, right, with sitting and listening to a teacher, sitting in rows of desks and things, but that's from a tradition that's basically training people to be the rulers and runners of society, right? Obviously in my day some of that class distinction is broken down, but it's still there. You're training people to then go to university and get fancy degrees and invent a new form of industrial mechanism that can run the factory.
we had
Sorry, continue, Bryce.
No worries. Jump in there. I'll be brief, but just we had that here as well. And when the Industrial Revolution took over and we had waves of immigration, what sort of happened was that private, elite sort of model of education found itself educating thinner and thinner slices of society, and public schools emerged to handle it was really just a population problem. And that sort of worked in the industrial era, leading then into the information era, kind of mid 20th century, where everybody goes to university and does knowledge work. But it never worked perfectly, and it was always a percentage game. And I think what we find, and this is, Sherry's talking about the Switzerland model as a point of contrast. Some people just aren't gifted, and they're not very good at doing academic work. They're not meant for university, but there's an immense amount of pressure to go get that, punch your card there so you can get a job that will pay you well enough. So I'm actually, I don't know, I look at the YouTube internet revolution as sort of throwing a third piece in, and it's, the world is flat, and it's never been more open and available to entrepreneurs. So all those other things haven't left us. We still have needs for industrial production, for knowledge work, but now there's this immense creativity that is available as well. But it can, the downside is it can be confusing. And how do you build institutions around that and organize the efforts of kids K through 12 and in any kind of, that scales? That's really tough to do.
I think I was raised with my mum. One of her hobby horses was, we don't want the American system where everyone goes to college, because that's what we've become now. But even in her day, when she was going to university in the 70s, it was still a very, very small slice of the population would go to higher education. And then in her parents' days, it was vanishingly small proportion. Almost everyone would not, and there were only like 3 universities. And it was a big kind of shift in British public policy in in very late 90s. It was when Blair came to power. He put forward the idea that he wanted 50% of all of the population of Britain to go to university, which
I think C.S. Lewis actually got.
There was no justification for it. It was an end in itself that we want everyone to go to university.
And it means you have to massively lower standards for who gets into university.
Yeah.
Yeah, and C.S. Lewis, he kind of bemoaned that there were too many people in university. I remember reading him having said that once. There's just too many people here, And I just want to hit on your gifted comment, because some people aren't gifted to go to university. Well, some university people aren't gifted to handle a hammer, let me tell you.
Yeah, I think I think this conversation is really important, because I think that education it has a lot of meanings, like we've been talking about, but it just is synonymous with good or important. Oh, well, you want to be smart. You want to be, this is crazy. Like, you can give a child, let's call it a 13-year-old, a big 5 standardized personality test and an IQ test, and you're going to know with some amount of certainty, what he's probably going to be good at and probably not good at. And you can hone those skills or not, but it's just I just don't understand why we're then adding this valence of good or bad life, good life. Oh, if you don't get that college degree, you'd have a bad life. If you did, you'd have a good life. It's just if you're a tradesperson, if you're a professor, these are all valid. And I really trust people to, optimally sort themselves due to incentives. I'm a big believer in the incentives of people eventually realize, I don't really like being a hobo in this boxcar. Maybe I should get a job somewhere. the idea that like unless we like tell them what to do, people just sort of lie down and stop moving is just crazy. It's just crazy. It's like that's not how people work at all. Like, in fact,
unless
sometimes
they're on fentanyl.
Yeah, I mean that's true. That's a
Right.
little bit of a different conversation, but
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
as someone smoking fentanyl currently, so I don't even think you smoke it, but that's why I'm not getting high. That's the problem. I haven't been able to. I've been getting an education and using hardcore drugs, and some of my peers in the industry are just. They're not as reliable as I would like. I'm like, do you have a YouTube on that?
Is it Connor? Connor, you should become a teacher.
You do stand up, don't you?
Yeah,
Or
I
you used
stand-up
to?
comedy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. We get like freebie. We get corner citizen freebies over here. It's great.
No, but yeah, it's like love. I mean, teaching kids about like the really, really, really. I know this is gonna sound so generic, but like loving them, exposing them to excellence in many fields. That can be athletics. It can be. It's not, like, oh, I need to expose my kids to excellence. Well, we will go to this white museum where they have art on the walls sorted by time period. And it's like, has anyone like experienced, yes, excellence? Like, just like, we must break it apart. We must be in our fundamental levels. Like, it's just like excellence can be. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, when you're talking about love, I'm thinking of the agape form of love, right? That a parent has for their children, the kind of love, if it's uncorrupted, that brings another person into being. And I can say, like watching the kids in Telegraph Creek, all the homeschooled kids, and then watching my own children develop in that setting, they're who they are really shone. Like it just shone out, And I can say, like, my oldest daughter's 40, my son is 35, my youngest is 33. And like they are not much different than they were when they were 7 and 8. Like seriously. Like their interests are pretty much the same. They've gotten more sophisticated, right? And they can handle responsibility. But that thing that shone out of them, it's and this is the thing I think education doesn't do. And that's why I took my daughter out of the public school system when they wanted to take her to a psychiatrist. Because I'm like, no, you're not going to do that. Those are boundaries that you are not crossing. Okay. I don't care if she never has a life, according to you, but that's who she is. And that's who you're not destroying. I'm not letting that happen. And I can personally say, and maybe I'm wrong, but I never saw that really happen anywhere outside of an intentional, conscientious homeschooling situation. Mm-hmm. Where the kids just really, maybe in the public school, there'll be the odd one who can do that, but it's because their teachers or some teaching professionals see it and they foster it in them, but they can't foster it in everybody. They don't have time. Right. Mm-hmm. So anyway.
Yeah. The boundaries should be sort of the natural boundaries that you're going to encounter in the world, not the boundaries of we only had a budget for one teacher for these 40 kids. So everybody has to be on Ritalin. So it's like, lift your tongue so I can make sure you swallowed the pill. It's just like, and it's like Nurse Ratched. Like, I mean, it's just, and we were like, obvious. We're like, well, it's strange that these things are happening. And then we'll immediately say, well, there's more than one reason that we're doing this. So it's not for the child. It's like, well, two parents have to work and blah, blah, blah. It's like,
it's to make everybody else's life easier. Right.
Yeah.
That's all. It's all. Yeah.
And it's like, this is, and we're like, so there's just, and no one has a full control over, like, it's just a complete egregore. It's just a million different politicians, working families, rich families, poor families, just like, and then we're just like, we partially inherited from early like teachings. I mean, there's still like schools named after people from like the early 1900s.
Well, okay, now let me just ask this question or throw this in here. Is it not surprising, or should it be surprising that kids are going back to school and killing people? Like shooting up schools?
Yeah. Well, I gave my son an AR-15 to defend himself. I was like, if they got guns, you gotta have one too. Okay, Tommy? All right, we're fighting fire with fire. Okay.
Do you live in Texas?
There's an M9 on your ankle for gym class, okay? So when they start playing dodgeball, someone throws something especially hard at your face, you know what to do. All right.
Sorry, I don't want to go on a tangent with that, but I'm just saying, like, something's brewing there, you know? What's brewing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean...
Well, here's one thing maybe I could say in defense of school.
Okay.
Which is...
Oh, I know how to defend at school. I know how to defend at school. Don't worry, Laura. We got it covered.
So when I think back to the kind of kid that I was, I had some talents, but one thing I didn't have was a good ability to organize projects and like see them through to an end point, right?
Yes.
I wasn't good at completing things. I wasn't good at doing things on a schedule. And so having to go through a school system that was really systematic and held me to deadlines and made me do things in steps and stuff was actually very, very good for me, because otherwise I think I would have been just grown up to be like a kind of formless, completely scatterbrained. I mean, I'm pretty scatterbrained as it is, but at least like I can get stuff done now, you know? Whereas maybe I wouldn't have grown up to be the kind of person who can get anything done, you know?
I echo
If
that,
no one had
Laura.
really held me to that.
I totally echo that. And I've seen that with my own kids. And I totally affirm, Sherry, homeschooling, all that. I'm in agreement. Our experience was that our boys, 4 out of our 5, have been diagnosed with some fairly significant level of dyslexia. It's not that they can't read, but they read with a different part of their brain. And so they need a different, and it just wasn't working at home. And to your point, Laura, I've found that the kinds of supports and the kinds of helps that are available to us at our local school are they're so valuable to us. And our kids are having to answer to somebody other than their mom, which is great at a certain age. But when you're 13 and we have all boys, and it just doesn't quite work as well. You know? And that could be a failure of something that we've done, but I think it's somewhat, I'm trying to chime in with an agreement about there is some value to figuring out how to fit into your local community and the institutions that are available to you. If that works for you, and your family, and if that's, and again, I'm not making a global claim that that's the only way.
Well, yeah, no, this is actually why I let my kids go to high school. Because I thought, okay, now you're going to have to figure out how to deal. Okay? Because you're not dealing in that way at home, right? At home, you can gripe and you can complain, you can fight about it, you can say what you think, but in the school, there's going to be times where you're not able to do that. And if you do, you're going to be laughed at, right? So get ready, kids, because here it comes. You know, but I just felt really strongly that I needed to make sure that they knew who they were before that happened, right? Because otherwise they would have been devastated by those events, and they weren't, you know. So my son's
that's a good point.
My son, he used to ride the school bus, and it was mostly all First Nations kids, and they were tough and they were difficult sometimes, and they made fun of him. And, you know, he managed to navigate that so that in the end they were all laughing and getting along. And if it got tense, he would just sleep on the bus. And but there was always this one bump on the highway that would wake him up, and he was always really pissed because now he had to face all the nastiness on the bus.
That is a skill. I'm in a highly dangerous situation. Quickly, fall asleep. Dang. Quickly, brain, activate sleep mode. Protection.
It was his way. It was his way.
You can't see them, they can't see you.
Yeah, dang.
Yeah. I don't think it was highly dangerous, but it was just something that he didn't want to bother with.
Yeah.
But see, that's my point. Like, he could actually not be bothered with it. He was that, you know, it didn't bother him, right? Whereas if he had been putting up with that for, you know, 11 years, who knows what that would have done to his self-esteem? I don't know, you know?
So I came through a lot of bullying in school, or what I perceived to be bullying. Although, you know, frankly, maybe it really wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Maybe that was part of the lesson I had to learn. But like, yeah, like I remember getting made fun of in school a lot in the younger years and like taking it really hard. And the fact that I went through years and years of it. If you had asked me when I was like a freshman in high school, was that of some value to you? I would have said no, it was just awful, and it would have just been better if all that stuff had never happened. But when I look back on it now, like I think probably it did do me some kind of good that I wasn't able to perceive in the moment. And like one thing that happened to me in school that was kind of cool, because like I had a great experience in high school, but it was like the years that I remember being really bad were probably, well, my worst year was probably 5th grade. It started getting better like after that. But I remember that once in high school, I was sitting next to a kid that I had been in middle school with. So one of the people I had known, you know, 5th through 8th grade, who I had had kind of a hard time with. And he was talking to, so, you know, several schools fed into my high school. Okay, so this kid came from the school that we were at before. And he was talking to someone who didn't go to that school. And he was like, you know, the thing I really loved about that school was that like we were all such great friends and it had like a family atmosphere and like we all really liked each other. And I was like, excuse me, what? You know, you guys don't really remember like how you used to treat me. And he was like, oh. And then he thought about it and he was kind of quiet. And like actually the next day he came up to me and he was like, Laura, you know, I thought about it and I realized we were actually really mean to you. And I just wanted to say sorry.
No, that's nice.
And I was like, oh, well, that's actually really great. And it was kind of good that I rode the system through those years where I could see that person get to a place where he was like, oh yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Sorry about that. And then it really did make it better because, you know, it was kind of a resolution. You know, having experiences like that is worth something, I think.
No, there's always lessons to be learned.
I've got in trouble for saying it before, but I reckon being bullied at school did me good. It taught me how to actually act in a way that wouldn't annoy everyone around me.
Exactly. Right. Sometimes there's a reason. Sometimes there's a reason why people are. I mean, I think there's usually a reason why people are bullying you. Sometimes it's something stupid, like not wearing the same clothes as everybody. But sometimes it's because sometimes it's because there's something kind of annoying and antisocial about you, and maybe you can fix it. You know. So.
That wasn't my experience at all. Not even a little bit.
Yeah, some people have had it really bad. Like my sister had it terrible. Like my sister, my younger sister, she was just naturally withdrawn and shy, and she was sickly, and that was it for her. She was done. Like she had cooties, right, and she got poked and prodded and kicked, and I was just like Superwoman, eh? Whenever I could, I was defending my sister. And I never had any of that. Like it just never even came near me. And I remember a few times, like she came home from school one day, she walked home on her own and some guy had jumped her and, tied her scarf really tight around her neck and she couldn't get it off. And
Ooh.
she's all blue,
Oh,
you
that's
know.
terrible.
And I just went on the warpath. I'm like, get my coat on. I'm like, I don't know, 10, get my coat on, and I'm out there and I'm hunting this guy down. and I beat him up, and
Yeah,
but I wasn't a
physical-
bully. I was just the defender, kind of thing. Sorry, Chad.
If you had physical deformity, you were pretty much fucked. I mean,
Yep.
I mean that, and that was. I mean, then there's no like. But okay, so like the silver lining is, if I was born in this time of Sparta or like 200 years ago, they might have left me in the woods or something. Because, and that's serious. Like I ended up finding research on that. I was like, holy shit! Like kids with like cleft lips and stuff like that, like 200 years ago, were fucked. So I guess being yeah, the things that I got to experience in all of my schooling, I guess, weren't so bad. But when they were happening, they were absolute horrible. Like I remember because Columbine happened after I got out of school, and I remember thinking the whole thing about Marilyn Manson, that's kind of bullshit. I think that's stupid. But I could identify with the resentment. But then again, it took me a long time to address the resentments much later. But it was understandable up to a degree, because it was like, well, I mean, if you guys dealt with the bullshit I dealt with, yeah, those guys, I wouldn't say they were my heroes at all or anything like that, but there was an understandable. I could see the reason. I can make reason of it.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, I remember a few times where I was afraid to go to school because someone had told me the day before that they were going to find me and they were going to beat me up.
But there's this totally different topic I wanted to share with you really quickly. What's really weird is I can't remember the last time we've talked about education around here, but so yesterday I had this conversation with Doug, and then we talked about Karen Wong, who was involved with the education system. So like there's this weird, if morphic fields aren't real, I don't know what the hell is, because all of a sudden now like education is like this highlight of this thing, and it's kind of been on my mind in the last couple of days, and that was on my mind before I hear you guys talking about it. So I just want to make a marker there for anybody who wants to take note of weird shit. That's some weird shit. Okay, back to regularly scheduled programming.
Thanks, Chad.
I actually wanted to talk about like the Luke and Brendan Graham Dempsey conversation, because it seemed like the title that Luke put on initially seemed to be related to that. But then we ended up talking about school instead.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about metamodernism.
What was that, Zach?
I don't know how the school thing started. I was
no, I don't know either. But it was
about the John Behr article.
It was good. I thought it was great.
It was a fine discussion, but
What did you want to address, Laura?
Oh, what do I want to address? I mean, I think it would be a whole long thing, so I probably shouldn't get into it now, because this has been running for almost 3 hours now.
Yeah.
But it was basically just the things that were implied by the title that Luke put on, like especially the thing about martyrdom being bad theology. We were talking about it on the Grail Country Discord yesterday.
Yeah.
It was just basically those same topics.
I haven't watched it yet, so I'm not familiar with the actual conversation. I just remember.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you should probably watch it. It was really interesting. I think it was a good conversation. But it did leave me with some questions, and also just like some of the tone of the conversations that have been going on around here lately has been giving me questions or making me wonder things. Like I always have this like I'm always unsure about whether I really understand Jonathan Pageau, right? And it's always the case that when I'm listening to him, I feel like I understand him. And but then when people are discussing him, I suddenly wonder whether I actually understand him as well as I thought I did. So I'd kind of like to try and pin some of those things down. But again, that would be a whole long discussion.
Yeah.
But speaking of it getting a bit long, I'd better head off. Thanks for the chat.
Thanks for joining us.
Wait, Zach, do you understand ecclesiology now? Did we help you?
Yeah, no, all my questions are answered.
That's great.
If you want to learn,
it's all about school and bullying.
All right.
Yeah. If you want to learn about it, don't go to school. Whatever you do, never run as fast as you can.
Have you guys ever watched the series Silicon Valley? And there's that character Peter Gregory in the first season who's always telling people not to go to college, and he's like really passionate about it.
Yeah. Which is hilarious because that guy's based on Peter Thiel, and I love Peter Thiel's writing. So whoopsie. But yeah. So yeah, that was a great character. Gosh, with the whole bullying thing, I feel like you guys aren't understanding how fun it is to beat up deformed, ugly kids. I feel like there's only one side of the dialogue that's being had, and I feel like in a spirit of openness, we should really, as a bully, I should be able to say my piece. So the amount of damage that was done is actually less than the amount of enjoyment that was received. So in a utilitarian sense, it's actually still optimal. So.
You know what? Alan, I'm starting to think we're going to have to charge you. We're going to have to start charging you for the content that you're creating for your comedy.
Or do you mean we have to pay him?
Yeah.
No, he needs to pay us.
Oh, really?
For all the content that we're giving him.
Oh, I see. Because we're giving him material. Right.
Yeah. So.
Oh, that was great. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you guys ever seen Izzy Kalman, the Bullies to Buddies guy?
Mm-mm.
Are you Googling him, Alan?
No.
Oh, okay.
It
looked like you were Googling something. So basically he teaches kids a method of overcoming bullying that has to do with well, first of all, not giving the bullies what they initially want, because the bullies initially want you to be really upset, right? And he has like some psychological techniques for kind of turning it around and like diffusing the situation and stuff. And so he shows sort of like sample dialogues for like stuff you could do to kind of diffuse a bullying situation. I don't know, it's interesting, but I've never actually tried it in real life, so I can't tell you if it actually works in the wild.
Mm-hmm. I personally think that the whole anti-bullying campaigns in school, which started a very long time ago, I mean, like just thinking about Chad and what he went through, there's definitely a need to do something, but that was a bad idea because now people feel entitled to be safe. And that's all I ever frickin' hear is how people are going to keep me safe, especially from my own prime minister. And I'm just
someone told me to stay safe on the phone yesterday. She was like, "Have a great day and stay safe."
I know. Oh yeah, it's everywhere. It's
I was like, what? I remember people used to say that like when COVID was newish and the big topic, and I didn't like it then, but I kind of understood why it occurred to them to say it.
Yeah.
I don't know why people would still be saying it though.
Yeah, well, it's like the number one reason to exist is to keep people
so you can be safe.
I was just like, what? And then of course Jordan Peterson comes floating back into my mind where he says, "Be careful about taking away the suffering of another person," right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that German saying, "Das Leben selber ist lebensgefährlich"? Oh, she's gone now. Drove her away.
Right here. I just had to let my cat out. I'm not familiar with it, but yes.
You could translate it as "life is hazardous to your health." I like to say it that way.
Yeah, but I like it directly translated. Das Leben, what? Das Leben?
Das Leben selber ist lebensgefährlich.
Yeah, das life itself is is lebensgefährlich. What is that in English?
Well, like, you know, it's a danger to your life. It's
Yeah, but we have a
hazardous.
word for that.
I don't
Lebensgefährlich.
know.
It's fatal.
Well, not necessarily. Gefährlich isn't fatal.
Gefährlich is dangerous.
Yeah.
Lebensgefährlich is life dangerous. But we
Right.
have a word for life dangerous.
Ellen, what's the word for life dangerous?
No, well, of course. I used it many times in my travails when I had to threaten fourth
Wait,
graders.
I'll look it up and see if the dictionary gives us a specific word.
Lebensgefährlich. I think there is one word for it. Like, yeah, but life itself is dangerous, I guess. But lebensgefährlich is life threatening. That's the word.
Life threatening, yes.
Life threatening.
Good
Life
one.
itself
is life
is life
threatening.
threatening.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah. Well, like who was it that said that recently? Douglas Harding. He says, you know, we're all, how did he put it? We're all well, we just don't get out of this thing alive, right? Like this thing called life. We don't get out of it alive. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just looking
Yeah,
at
I mean, essentially what we're talking about is the whole anti-fragile thing from Jonathan Haidt, which, you know, I think I told this story once, but I had this old rancher neighbor, and he asked me a question. He said, Sherry, have you ever heard this? People are talking about free range parenting. What is that? And you know, like we live
it's just
on
like having a normal childhood.
We live on open range here. Like there's
Mhm.
literally thousands of cows out there. And when the ranchers put their cows out in the spring, they call it free ranging, right?
Mhm.
So he was just like totally confused. And this guy's like in his 80s. And I said, Eric, it's just people are calling, you know, just letting kids go out and play unsupervised. They're calling that free range parent. He goes, what?
Yeah,
That's all
we
he
have, to
ever did.
we have to have special terms for normal things now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like forest bathing.
Yeah.
Have you heard that one? Forest bathing?
No.
It's just walking in the woods. It's called
Yeah.
forest bathing now. So.
Oh yeah, and somebody pointed out some woman who was walking without earbuds. She called it something, I can't remember what.
Oh wow, that's interesting. Free earring.
Free earring.
Free range earring.
Free range earring. You should try it. It's so good for you. Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I mean, just I know we're not going to talk about modern Christianity, but one thing that was really interesting, I think, was his conversation with Sam, Brendan Graham Dempsey's conversation with Sam. He mentioned anti-fragile Christianity, and I thought that was just a wonderful concept.
Yeah.
So
he was promoting it, or he thought it should be a thing, or what?
Brendan Graham Dempsey was essentially talking about his project of, you know, developing modern Christianity is developing a anti-fragile Christianity, which I mean, I think if you frame it that way, I'm like, yeah, I'm all for that. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we could talk about anti-fragility in general. If I think I agree that we probably shouldn't try to turn the discussion to the big discussion about modern Christianity. Then we're going to be here another 3 hours, and that'll be silly. But like, if I return to what I was saying about how there can be some utility to bullying, I'm going to emphasize some, because obviously there's a kind of bullying that really should not happen, is totally out of line, and is targeting people for things that like they have no control over. Like, you know, obviously that's out of bounds. But like when I think back to my experience in school, you know, I think like some of the stuff people made fun of me for was just like I wasn't good at picking the clothes that were in style, you know?
Yeah,
so I would show up with like some pair of jeans, and everyone would be like, oh, I can't believe you're wearing those jeans. And then it would be like the topic of the day. And every time I walked past a group of people, they'd be like, hey, Laura, with your jeans, you know? Like, that's just stupid. I don't know if that did me any good, but you know, there were I can think of some ways in which like I wasn't great at relating.
Wait,
to
Laura,
people. Yes?
just to be clear, what kind of jeans are you wearing now?
Right
And
now,
we'll know
I can
if
show
it,
you. I can show you. I
we'll
am
know
wearing
if it
jeans.
worked or not. If
I am
it's
wearing
a-
jeans right now. Oh no, you can't really see them very well though. I'd
All
have to
right.
like get up on my chair.
Dang.
Oh,
All
look
right.
at my jeans.
Never mind.
Okay.
The bullying didn't work. Never mind.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm still wearing jeans. So like, Kale Zeldin could come and bully me because he doesn't like people wearing denim, right? Like you can't. One of the things you learn if you get that kind of bullying in schools, you can't make everyone happy all the time, right? Another thing you learn is the thing that maybe some like Twitter users haven't managed to learn yet, which is if people decide that you're uncool, they're going to make fun of everything you do. And if you try to change to do what you think they're going to think is cool, they're still going to make fun of you because they've already just decided you're out, you know? That's actually a useful lesson to learn.
Yeah, it's kind of like I don't know. I learned a lot of endurance through suffering. Just hang in there. It'll be over any minute now, you know?
But like that kind of knowledge that like that there isn't necessarily something you can do to appease the people who don't like you, right? That's a good thing to know.
the old adage, right? You can please some of the people some of the time.
Yeah, but learning that through experience, right, is a lot more.
But here's something. So I was watching the Climbing Mount Sophia conversation with Vervaeke and Pajot and Schindler, and Vervaeke made this point. They were talking about suffering, and then Vervaeke wanted to clarify, because for him there was two kinds of suffering. There was a loss of agency, and then there was, I think it was like a direct translation from the word itself in Greek, maybe, undergoing. And he said, are you talking about that? Are you talking about loss of agency, or are you talking about undergoing? And I thought, I never heard the undergoing thing from him before. I'd often heard of him talk about it in terms of loss of agency. And I thought, well, that's really interesting, undergoing, because that's literally, I'm using the word now, Luke, literally the opposite of overcoming, right? Undergoing and overcoming. And in Revelation, there are a number of verses that talk about us as overcomers, right? That we get the white stone name as overcomers. We get the crown as overcomers, right? And I thought, well, if you think about it in those terms, the way that Vervaeke's talking about it, then if undergoing is suffering, then overcoming is somehow what's the word? Without using overcoming.
I'm sorry, I was just reading comments.
Being victorious over suffering, right?
Yeah.
Being victorious through the suffering or something like that. Anyway, I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and you have to undergo to overcome. Right? I mean, you can't overcome if you don't overgo. So
yeah,
it's almost part of it. So, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I
thought that was really, I was like, wait a minute. Because as soon as he said that, I was like, because I'm constantly harping on the overcoming verses. So I'm like, okay, that's in direct contrast to suffering, right? That overcoming has to be about suffering. What is it you overcome, right? And I think that's why Peterson's statement that we have to be careful about what kind, the suffering that we take away from others, that always resonated with me, because I've seen kids who've had suffering taken away from them just for the sake of it, and they're just obnoxious.
Yeah.
Okay? They're so obnoxious. They're so entitled. Sorry, kids.
Hey, are you bullying them right now? I think you're bullying those kids, Sherry.
Yeah, to all the kids watching the live stream right now, I apologize on Sherry's behalf for bullying you
never
so
have made you feel that way.
endlessly.
It was wrong then, and it's wrong now. There's no excuse for what Sherry said.
Dang, Sherry, you and Justin Trudeau got to get up back on your apology tour, okay?
I know. I'm gonna have to crawl around on my knees a little bit till they bleed.
Yeah. Anyway, another thing I learned from getting the minor bullying that I got which I will reiterate, didn't seem minor to me at the time, but in retrospect was probably pretty minor. But I think it seemed major to me because I was pretty sensitive, and maybe one of the things I needed to do was be less sensitive about what people said about me. But anyway, one thing I learned is that, like, sometimes bullying is just stupid and people are being stupid and you should ignore them. But sometimes they are telling you something true about your faults. Well, like maybe you actually maybe you actually aren't that considerate, or you're not that, or you're like not a very good team player, or you know, you're not being considerate to people in ways that they could reasonably expect. You know, those are reasons why you might get why you might take some flack in like a school setting or a setting of among peers that are probably pretty legit. And if you can learn from them, that is good.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I'm good. I'm on the highway driving home from a week-long team building corporate world, my day job where I lark as a salesperson. And
Did you have to do Did you have to do trust balls?
No, but I had to drink more alcohol than I normally like to.
Terrible.
Yeah, real rough. Real rough.
Would people have bullied you if you had said no to the alcohol? Would they have been like, "You're such a loser"? Do what everyone else is doing. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, so I first wanted to get on because I thought I had something that could tie in the education talk to the modern talk.
Oh, okay.
But I also have lots of experience with bullying and being bullied, so I can talk about that too. But the thing I wanted to say about education, which I think is true of the same thing's happening or could be happening in metamodernism, which is and it kind of relates to the idea of like the good enough parent that I heard about a while ago, where it's like parents are in some ways supposed to fail. You know, if your relationship with your parents is exactly the same as it was when you were a teenager, something is like very, very wrong. And so I think that there's a similar way in which all education is supposed to fail. And like not in obviously human beings who it's their job to educate don't want to fail at educating. But I mean in the sense of part of growing up is looking back at your life and seeing, oh yeah, my parents weren't perfect. Oh yeah, my best friend had some real flaws that I share because I spent so much time with him. And like, oh yeah, my school had really lots of pros, but it set me up in this weird way to not be able to relate to people in this way. And I think that that's related to the metamodern question because it seems like it's almost in the Hegelian dialectic sense. We're always kind of circling around this contradiction or this rift in thought. And it's like, okay, yes, whatever ism of the day is meant to fail. And so it doesn't seem like as complicated of a question of like, what's really going on? It's more like the process of thought, like the Hegelian process of thought is always a noticing, whether consciously or unconsciously, of the failure of the system and the ways in which a human being and an individual cannot be put into some system that works perfectly. And I think, of course, this is related to the fall, which maybe that's what relates it back to bullying. But yeah, like things are not okay as they are not as okay as they could be is another way to say that, I guess.
Do you think God was a bully for sending Adam and Eve out into out of the garden?
No. I think maybe he was being a little.
Was our Lord being a bully when he called the Pharisees whitewashed sepulchres?
Or when he flipped the tables?
Oh yeah.
I think it is a little bit of a bully move to ask Adam where he is.
Well, hey Adam, where are you?
Yeah, where are you, Adam? What you doing? Why are you hiding? What you got to hide, bud? It's a little.
Stop hitting yourself.
Cain, where is your brother? Do you have? I haven't seen him. Perchance have you?
I don't know. Where is he, bro?
Really good.
I hope
Hi,
God
Jeff.
rest.
Hi. I was just dropping in to say hi.
Oh, that's so nice.
Hey, Jess.
Yeah.
Hey, Luke.
Yeah. Okay.
Job, I'm a big fan. Just wanted to say that. Thank you for all of
McMo,
your hard work.
Wait,
trying
wasn't
to-
Luke Thompson just here for like 2 minutes?
He was.
Now he's
It was
gone.
a chimera of him.
He got intimidated. He got intimidated by my silky timbre.
Yeah. He heard,
Maybe we need
you
to
know.
bully Luke more.
Yeah. He heard
I
a
thought
Hegelian.
maybe he came in to correct me on my use of the word literal.
You know, McMo
No,
dropped.
huh? Go ahead.
McMo dropped Hegelian dialectic, and Luke was like, "I can't be exposed as a fraud, so I have to leave." You know, someone else is using bigger words than me. I can't abide this for a moment.
Yeah, so actually, I did want to ask that question. Like, what do you guys think of this idea of the necessary failure of education, or the essentially, McMo? Did you say the necessary failure of everything? Something like that?
Yeah. It's almost like a Felix culpa kind of a thing.
Well, certainly as a teacher, you would be pleased with a result that was the student doesn't need me anymore and can even critique some stuff that I say and be correct about it. Then you've succeeded in a sense.
I went to school with a Felix culpa.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I think we probably all went to school with
some.
We probably all went to school with some kids with funny names, but we probably shouldn't say them on YouTube. I'm gonna say because people could Google them and it could become a thing. So I'll control myself.
Yeah, like when you were talking about that, I was thinking, learn from your mistakes, right? Like there's kind of it's like the idea of climbing the ladder and the rungs fall out from beneath you, which kind of sucks up times, especially if you're afraid of heights. But
yeah, well,
yeah.
What I was thinking is, I mean, all this talk about suffering. You know, if you never fail, if you never suffer, you never overcome. If we build an anti-fragile Christianity where no one ever suffers, no one goes through deconstruction, would that be a good thing?
Mm-hmm.
You know? Yeah, well, I think McMo, like, that's such a brilliant insight, because I do sense in this conversation there's like almost like a desire to build the perfect system where no one gets hurt and no one suffers, and it's like it's not possible. And there is something inherently, I think, redemptive or salvific about overcoming suffering. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I wrote a comment under that video addressing that, because it was kind of striking to me when I noticed it, and I said, these two words are literally opposites, and then I said, is that a coincidence? As in coincidence of opposites, right? Because that's I think essentially what we're talking about is we have to live in this tension, right, in order to become fully formed human beings, something like that.
Yeah, and I do get the impression from some of the younger people now that they think that the only way you can actually become a good and well-functioning adult is if you had like a perfect upbringing with no suffering in it. When in fact, I think they're quite
that was Buddha.
About that.
That was Buddha.
Yeah,
he's a perfect example of that. What happens when you do that to somebody? They go out in the world and lose their.
Well,
no.
I even remember. I remember growing up, and like as I was a teenager and stuff, I would like, the youth pastor did something, like he wasn't nice to me, and then I would say to myself, I'd be like, oh, when I'm older, I wouldn't do that to a kid, or and then like that was like kind of an immature thing, but you have these ideas like I'm going to do things perfect when I grow up, and then like even as I got into my early 20s and stuff, like I don't know, I didn't want to necessarily make mistakes, and so like I was like, all right, what do I got to do to make sure that I don't make any like huge mistakes? I mean, obviously you don't want to make giant mistakes, but I mean, part of, I don't know, like that itself is a mistake.
Yeah.
I got some good advice when I was in college and I was working as a camp counselor, and there was this sort of I don't know, like this presentation that somebody had to lead every day, to put it concisely. And somebody asked me to be the leader for it, and it was a pretty complicated thing that you had to do every day, and it had to like be a whole story, and it had to have a point. Anyway, kind of hard to describe, but
that's the worst
he's
part.
like, he said, I think you could do this. Would you be willing to do this thing? And I said, no, I don't think I could do that. And he said, okay, well, are you saying you can't do it because actually, like, you don't have time because you have other commitments? Or are you saying you can't do it because you're afraid it's going to suck? In which case, my question to you would be, why should you get out of sucking? And I was like, huh. It was going to be the second one, and I guess you're right. And so then I went ahead and did it, and it actually did kind of suck. Like, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't really good either. But then I also did it on the next go around, like for the next camp session, and the second one was actually really good. So then in the
So
end,
you
I
were
was really
honing
happy
your
that I'd taken it
skills.
on. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
you got to honing those skills. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Practice
something.
makes perfect. Sorry.
Something's coming up for me. Yeah, it's totally okay. Something's coming up for me. I wonder if this works or fits, which is, it's like along the same lines of like life sucking and having to learn that life sucks, and the idea of Buddhism, you know, like that's right in there with, you know, what is it, the rule number 1 or whatever, life is suffering, or in life there is suffering. But there's almost a sense in which, like, and this also connects to, yeah, the Zoomers not being able to be perfect because their environment wasn't absolutely perfect. And it's like, I think that there's almost a way in which Buddha is like the opposite of Christ, where in some sense, Buddha's life shows that you can have the perfect upbringing and be rich, and then where enlightenment is found is the exact opposite of that. But I think the Christian move is slightly better because like there's almost a sense in which Jesus's first miracle was turning a manger into a crib, and turning that crib into the entire world, like making the whole world his crib. And I just get this sense that like the temptation is so strong to look at your suffering and to not consider it momentary, to somehow consider it the defining factor of what made you a person. And there is an element to that, because I do believe in the fortunate fall, but I think that like the Christian move is to, because you don't hear Jesus kvetching about how rough it was to be born in a manger. You know, he doesn't go to the Pharisees and say, you who were raised indoors, you know, like repent. You know? But the move is to redeem that, you know, and to, by sacrificial love, prove that the whole world is a manger, you know. And that, so I wonder if that kind of fits in with the like.
Beautiful.
Yeah, because I just don't want to complain about how how rough it was to be brought up in a private Christian school and, you know, have to say the Pledge of Allegiance and the Pledge of
Well, I
Bible
just want to recommend to everyone, and if I could right now, I would show it. There's a great Monty Python skit called The Four Yorkshiremen.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And it's all about this, where these 4 guys are talking about how when they were young, they had to walk a mile to school, and the other guy's like, luxury. And it just goes down this rabbit hole. And it's so, you know, first, so, you know, then they don't even have, you know, the one guy doesn't even have a house to live in, and then the other guy's just living in a paper bag in a septic tank. You know, and every day their mother would kill them. It's so hilarious.
Monty Python's the best.
Another Monty Python adjacent thing that would be kind of relevant here is Tompkinson's School Days, which is one of the episodes of Ripping Yarns, which is a thing that Michael Palin did with I think it was Terry Jones. Like the two of them got together and did that. It wasn't under the auspices of Monty Python though. But that's like, you know, the typical elite British public school, aka private school, Where you get
another favorite Monty Python
where you
skit of
get
mine.
bullied all the time and the teachers torment you in various ways.
The narrator, it's just an empty field with little shrubberies around, and the narrator is looking for people. You know the one I'm talking about, Jess? He's looking.
I kind of remember, but I can't remember what the
He says,
punchline was.
Mr. Smith is hiding, right? And we're going to find him. And then he goes, because he's making fun of the English and how proper they are, right? So he goes, Mr. Smith, please stand up. And the guy goes, bing, from behind a bush. And then they bomb him, right? They bomb him.
Alan,
watch that one too. It's so
Alan,
good.
I know you're not aware, but Monty Python was actually a very popular British sketch show. And so I know that's probably why you haven't been laughing, because you weren't aware. But yeah, I would really highly recommend Monty Python.
I just think comedy as a whole. I mean, Jesus never laughs in the gospel. Just as a Christian, I just think it's inappropriate, really, comedy as a whole. So, that's just my personal take on it, as just someone who's been sanctified and washed in the blood and glorified, and
do you guys ever think like the line about like complaining about the speck in someone else's eye when you've got a log in your own eye? Like, do you think when that was actually delivered, it was actually really funny? I always like to think that was really funny.
There was
In
one
the
of those
moment,
Jesus films or whatever where they delivered it like that, like where he's talking to everyone, he's like a speck in your, and then he like picks up this log and he's like walking around the crowd.
Okay.
Was that Life of Brian?
No, it was like the Book of Matthew or something.
Oh boy.
Jesus was the first Jewish comedian.
Yeah.
What's with these logs?
Hey.
I do have there's a passage that I consider a joke from Christ, and it's when I think it's Bartholomew, whoever says like, what good can anything good come from Nazareth or whatever.
Right.
And then as he's walking up to Jesus, Jesus says, here is a man within whom there is no deception, or whatever he says. Like, I've always heard that as Jesus being a little bit ironic and sarcastic and just saying like, oh yeah, this guy really gets it.
Well, then isn't it the same? Is that Nathaniel? And part of that same incident is that he's like, I saw you sitting under a tree, and Nathaniel's like, whoa, you're the Son of God. And then he's like, wow, if you're impressed with me saying I saw you sitting under a tree, you're going to see a lot of stuff that's going to impress you way more.
Right.
Yeah. I forget, is it Paul? I forget, is it Paul that meets the magician? But I always imagine the magician that the disciples encounter was like a Chris Angel magician, and he just was like had like emo hair and just was like ripped jeans, and he's like, mind freak, I can hear it, and then just like descending down. Black eyeliner. They never specify what kind of magician this guy is. So I'm like, he could be the old school Victorian, like perfect, like mutton chops and mustache, or he could be. He could be like Chris Angeled out and just be like, everything's in black and white. I mean, I need more details on this magician.
Yeah. Wasn't his name Simon the Sorcerer or something like that? I can't remember. Something like that.
I do think that it's an interesting kind of almost, I mean, it's definitely not at the same level of like Alexia Divina type of situation. But I have often tried to practice reading passages of scripture as if it were a joke I wasn't getting, and to try to to read it as funny, and to read it as what's the punchline here. And I think that is kind of like a cool exercise. I definitely recommend it.
Well,
be careful.
That's Laura. Yesterday, Laura popped in a thing in the Discord, and I was happy to hear it or see it, because it was a game that I used to play and with the kids and friends. And it was when you just take a sentence and you say, like, I believe in God. Like, so then you put the emphasis on differently on each word, and it completely changes the meaning of the sentence. Just slight emphasis changes, right? Like, I believe in God. I believe in God. I believe
I believe, I
in,
believe, I believe, I believe, I believe.
I
Yeah.
believe in God, you know? Yeah. Interesting.
Well, there's only one true interpretation, and I have it. I don't want to go into detail, but I wouldn't do that. I would just, it's all locked in here. What they intended.
Whenever Alan speaks up, Luke has to check to see if he's serious. Luke's like, what? Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Am I hearing this right?
There are a few obvious like good jokey lines in the Bible that sometimes don't seem as funny as they should because of the way we translate them. So like there's the one line that's usually translated something like, it's when the Israelites are talking to Moses and they're in the desert and they're having trouble, and most of the translations say something like, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out here to die in the desert? Right. But if you were going to say that now, oh yeah. If you were going to say that now, it'd be like, what? There are no graves in Egypt? You had to bring us out here to die? Like, thanks a lot,
Boom, roasted.
Yeah.
There's another one that's always made me laugh, and it's when Lazarus is about to get raised, and it's but Lord, he stinketh. That's what's always made me giggle. The King James especially, just but Lord, he stinketh.
Well, when Jessica and I did the book of Job, we talked a lot about how God's speech in the beginning, he says to Job, now gird up your loins, right? I will ask you and you will answer me. And a lot of people, they perceive God as this sky daddy that's like booming down, pick up your pants, kind of thing. Right? And God's going to show him, and I hear it all the time. Like even recently I heard someone describe it this way. And I'm just like, and I remember when we talked about it, I was like, what if we tone it all down to, and then Jess made this beautiful observation that it was actually giving Job back his dignity. Remember that, Jess?
Yeah, because he's like down in the dust, and God's like, get up, and let's deal with this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I remember.
I mean, he is put your pants on too.
I remember when Jeff couldn't even hardly talk about it because he was like tearing up and.
Yeah. There's definitely a saddle up cowboy, gear up soldier kind of feel to it. But then also, if God comes to you in a whirlwind and says, "Pick up your pants," you better pick up your pants.
Well, I've read portions of the book of Job as thinking it as if it was a comedy, and it reads as a comedy. Like you can read it as a comedy, and it's dark and hilarious and weird, and because you can interpret it either very, very sincere or very, very sarcastic, or all those things.
Right. That's the same thing as where are you, Adam? Where were you when the foundations of the earth were laid?
Yeah.
Okay, so
you haven't seen a behemoth?
Yeah. But, like I always think of it as a father to his child. So it's like, how would you say that to your child? You wouldn't make fun of them. You wouldn't belittle them. You'd be saying that in a way that gives them a sense of awe, right?
Well, it's the kind. Oh, are we still talking about? Wait, which line are you talking about now? Because I was still thinking about putting your pants back on.
All of it.
Because there is a way. There's a way to say that. There's a way to say that it's like, "Hey, man up," and there's a way to say it that's like a parent kind of talking down a kid who's having a tantrum, right? Where it's the kind of, okay, now put your pants back on.
Well, the thing is, though, you also have to remember that in those times, like if God shows up, people were falling on their faces on the ground, right? And God says to Job, stand up, right? I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to answer me. Like I'm here for this conversation you've been demanding for the whole book, right? Let's do it. Right.
Yeah. Well, and the other interesting thing about that is God's talking to Job as if he was still the great man that he used to be.
Yes.
So
that's where the dignity comes in.
Right. And the fact, we always think of Job as just the man that's sitting in the dust suffering, which he is. but he's also the man that used to be great and that will be great again. And so like God's like trying to build him back up.
Well, God's never seen him any differently, right? Like that's the thing.
He constantly says, my servant Job, my servant Job, my servant Job. Like he's consistent across. And then the other thing that people don't realize about God's speech is that God's talking to Job. Like he may not talk to you like that. He may not come to you and be like in a whirlwind telling you to put on your pants, but he's talking to Job like that because that's Job. Like that's how you talk to Job. And so,
yeah.
Well, and the reason why you know that is because Job's actually encouraged and comforted by it. And you're like, that wouldn't be encouraging and comforting to me. And you're like, well, okay.
Not if it was in the tone that most people read it in. You know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm trying to put together a video on Jung's and he has this book about Answer to Job. And man, Jung's an interesting dude. I've been like listening to a bunch of his interviews and whatever, but it's so. And then I listened to Bernardo Castro, who's like a Jung expert and philosopher, and they talk through all of Jung's stuff, and Jung has like complicated view of the psyche and world, and then when they get to God's speech of the book of Job, they're just like, yeah, it's just a tirade. That's it. I'm just like, that's it? It's just a tirade? And then they just sort of dismiss it.
I'm gonna have to hook you up with Bernardo and you guys can duke it out. Because seriously, like so many people get it wrong. Like and I don't say that lightly, but that is just wrong. You know.
I know.
Anyway. That's one of the things I never say, but I just said it.
The things are wrong. Well, I've been here for about 3 hours, so I should probably go do something else.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go too. Do you want to stay, Jess?
I gotta get to work. I'm overcome with jobs to do.
Yeah. Okay.
But I just wanted to come in here and say hey.
Okay. And Luke, before you dash off, I would love to have a conversation with you about farming and horticulture and spirituality and all that kind of thing. It's kind of like up my alley, and I don't know how to get a hold of you. I'm asking you.
Yeah. Do you have contact info public or?
Well, I mean, I don't have. I'm on the Discord.
I can just stay on the call once Jess gets off, and but then it'd be on YouTube. Huh.
We can end the stream. And then
I can end the stream. And then
Okay. Let's do that.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. It was great fun. Talk to you later.
Bye, Jess.
See ya.